Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to hear the sound and see how you are interacting with each other. But we have a very busy and intense agenda, a lot of speakers and delegates who have requested the floor. So we have to start. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, mostly welcome to the second day of OSCE PA 22nd winter meeting. I hope you had a good day yesterday and took part in the various discussions, debates, and will continue to do so today. Before we start the meeting, let me remind you that this meeting is being recorded and broadcasted on the OSCE PA's social media platforms and website. Let me also inform you that the list of speakers for our open debate is closed. Members will be asked to limit their intervention to 2 minutes. And now let's continue with the draft agenda. Number 1, adoption of the agenda. A draft agenda have been circulated. Can we adopt the agenda? Yes, the agenda is adopted. And now let's go further on. Number 2, opening remarks by the President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. Fellow parliamentarians, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, every one of us remember where they were a year ago. Some of us met that day in this room as Russian missiles rained on Ukrainian cities and military columns poured across Ukraine's border. We are still gripped by the shock of the aggression. We remember the emotion we felt when our dear colleague, Nikita Potorayev, left these halls to return to Kiev and fight. We did not know whether we would see him again or not. This year, he is here in Vienna. He is with us, even if he is not in the meeting room. But a year later, we are here. And a year later, Ukraine stands resilient, strong, and free. With each passing hour, we hope to come closer to the day when the people of Ukraine will enjoy their full independence and sovereignty within their international recognized borders. But each passing hour also brings countless of victims, from the soldiers defending their homeland, from those who are taking care of the homes, for those who are providing health care, for those who are taking care about all the other social duties that are to be performed in a country as well as in Ukraine. And their sacrifice calls on us to redouble our efforts to guarantee the right of all Ukrainians to live in peace and dignity. Dear members of Parliament, we have been steadfast in our support for Ukraine since the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. We have never shied away from denouncing the Russian Federation's clear, gross, and uncorrected violation of the Helsinki Final Act. Our political position is clear. Today's debate should serve to further reaffirm it. But it's also clear that we all wish to go beyond mere experience of solidarity. We want to act decisively in support of Ukraine. Many of us have done so in our national parliament, in our constituency. But we do also want to use the OSCE PA platform to do even more. We must fully utilize the Assembly as a common platform to gather support for Ukraine, while jointly calling out the Russian Federation's violations of OSCE commitments, the UN Charter, and international law. However, we must remain realistic about what we as the Parliamentarian Assembly can do and can't do. We should always consider where and when the OSCE PA is best placed to advance security, and we must remain conscious of our limits, but also of our possibility. And I think our possibility is the most important thing, and also that we stay united. The unity we have here in our room, in our support of Ukraine, this is a fantastic tool to strive forward for peace inside OSCE region, and a peace based on Ukraine's will and Ukraine's demands and support of their sovereignty. In line with our commitments and capabilities, I have developed for the past year an action plan on Ukraine, which outlines what message we can amplify, what activities we can undertake, and how together we can translate our solidarity into concrete actions. This plan is well complemented by the joint statement of action proposed by Vice President Senator Roger Wicker. This statement was shared with you ahead of our winter meeting. It was endorsed by our Bureau on Wednesday, and I expect our debates to also signal overwhelming support for this document. Dear colleagues, the challenge brought to the fore by the Russian war in Ukraine are endless. Russia has shattered European security. We must think about how we can put these broken pieces back together. I look forward to the result of the ministerial meeting taking place today in New York, where also OSCE chairperson in office take part, as well as Secretary General of OSCE governmental side. To have the greatest impact, we must continue coordinating closely with our governments and international parliaments. Together, we can ensure that the Russian Federation is held accountable for the atrocities in the war against Ukraine, that war crimes are fully investigated, and that reparations compensate for the incalculable damage caused by the war. In our respective parliaments, we have to call attention to and hold the Russian Federation accountable for the abduction of Ukrainian children. Justice has to be delivered to the victims of the war. Away from the battlefield, there are many issues to tackle today, from welcoming refugees to preventing illegal deportation, from ensuring energy security to preventing global hunger, and to support continued efforts to reinforce democratic governance and the rule of law. On all of these issues, OSCE and the Parliamentary Assembly must continue to seek ways to reaffirm our support for Ukraine. This is where our energy must be directed. Thank you. Thank you. And now let's move forward to the general debate. 1 year in, Russia's continued full-scale war on Ukraine. And I do now welcome the general debate. I have asked several members to present reports to frame our discussion. I will first ask Special Representative on Eastern Europe, Dr. Daniela De Ridder, to take the floor. But in respect of the time limits, I kindly ask you to keep to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin Zedderfeld, sehr geehrter Herr Generalsekretär Montella, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Heute vor genau einem Jahr hat Russland seinen illegitimen Krieg gegen die Ukraine begonnen und die europäische Friedensordnung schwer beschädigt. Als Sonderbeauftragte für Osteuropa innerhalb der Parlamentarierversammlung verurteile ich diesen imperialistischen Angriffskrieg auf das Schärfste. Kindesentführungen, Vergewaltigungen und sexualisierte Gewalt, Misshandlungen und Folter sind leider an der Tagesordnung. Gegen die Qualen der Zivilbevölkerung senden wir aber hier als Abgeordnete ein klares Signal der Solidarität an die Ukraine und an die ukrainische Delegation, die hier in Wien weilt. In parlamentarischen Gesprächskreisen zur östlichen Partnerschaft der EU hatte ich in den vergangenen Wochen mehrfach Gelegenheit, mit MenschenrechtsaktivistInnen, OppositionspolitikerInnen und WissenschaftlerInnen aus der Ukraine, aus Russland und aus Belarus zu sprechen. Die Kontakte zu den zivilgesellschaftlichen Kräften sind mir als Zeichen der Solidarität und der Ermutigung besonders wichtig. Wir müssen all jene stärken, meine ich, die unter großer persönlicher Gefahr öffentlich Position gegen Russlands Krieg beziehen. Putin führt ja mit großer Verachtung auch Krieg gegen die eigene Zivilgesellschaft. Das zeigt etwa das Beispiel der Menschenrechtsorganisation Memorial, die den Friedensnobelpreis erhalten hat. Und ich bin sehr dankbar, dass ich Irina Scherbakowa im Deutschen Bundestag kennenlernen konnte. Neben dem grausamen und zermürbenden Stellungskrieg in der Ukraine müssen wir allerdings auch die Situation in den Nachbarländern im Blick behalten. Etwa den Blick auf Belarus, dessen Verhalten als Co-Aggressor ebenfalls scharf zu verurteilen ist. Hier besorgt mich insbesondere die Situation der Frauen, auch jener, die Lukaschenkas Regime ins Exil gezwungen hat. Frau Tichanowskaja hat uns gestern ja daran auch noch einmal deutlich erinnert. In die Republik Moldau lohnt sich der Blick, denn deren Stabilität wird durch prorussische Kräfte deutlich gefährdet. Auch der Blick nach Polen, in die baltischen Länder oder in die skandinavischen Länder ist wichtig, denn diese wurden durch den Krieg Russlands gegen die Ukraine in große Unruhe versetzt, was ja allerdings auch zu der zermürbenden hybriden Kriegsführung Putins gehört. Auf dem europäischen Kontinent hat Russlands verbrecherischer Krieg die größte Fluchtbewegung seit Ende des Zweiten Weltkriegs ausgelöst. Sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, wir sollten uns von 3 Prinzipien, was die OSZE-PV-Arbeit angeht, in den nächsten Wochen und Monaten leiten lassen. Erstens, wir dürfen nicht zulassen, dass ein Land sich mit Gewalt Teile eines anderen Staates ungestraft einverleibt, die Grundprinzipien unserer Friedensordnung missachtet und die Identität eines Landes auszulöschen versucht. Dies geht aber nicht ohne den diplomatischen Dialog und ohne den Dialog mit allen hier in der OSZE-Parlamentarierversammlung. Zweitens, mit der Schlussakte von Helsinki sind wir dem Schutz der Menschenrechte besonders verpflichtet. Die Verbrechen von Butscha und Irpin müssen strafrechtlich verfolgt werden. Und der Straflosigkeit von Kriegsverbrechen müssen wir entgegenwirken. Ich rufe die Mitglieder der PV ausdrücklich dazu auf, die Strafermittlungen der internationalen Gerichte zu unterstützen. Auch die Parlamentarische Versammlung, also wir hier, müssen stets eine öffentliche Anklagetribüne für die Kriegsverbrechen sein. Und drittens, die Ukraine benötigt neben humanitärer, finanzieller und wirtschaftlicher Unterstützung auch militärische Hilfe. Wie sonst kann sie ihre territoriale Integrität und ihre Souveränität verteidigen. Wir stehen also alle hier solidarisch an der Seite der Ukraine, jedenfalls eines Staates, der angegriffen wird und sich verteidigen muss. Es ist an Russland, diesen ungerechtfertigten und verbrecherischen Krieg zu beenden. Wenn die Ukraine aufhört zu kämpfen, ist ihr Existenzrecht bedroht und ist möglicherweise vernichtet. Allerdings, wenn Russland aufhört zu kämpfen, ist der Krieg beendet. Einen Diktatfrieden des russischen Imperialismus darf es nicht geben. Herzlichen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Dr. Daniela De Ridder. I will now ask our special representative on parliamentary dialogue on Ukraine, Vice President Reinhold Lopatka. The floor is yours, and 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Margarete. Dear colleagues, the war in Ukraine and its tragic consequences in every aspect of life, security, humanitarian, economic, environmental, exceeded the European continent, require us to be even more active in stopping it as soon as possible. In that sense, and as a member of the Austrian Parliament and the Parliamentary Assembly's Vice President, I had the privilege to be appointed by the Assembly's President, Margareta Sederfeld, as the Assembly's Special Representative for Parliamentary Dialogue on Ukraine on 12th of May last year. And let me use this opportunity to thank Margareta Sederfeld for her work in this field, but also for her confidence. I was tasked with a mandate to take necessary initiatives to assist the Russian Federation and Ukraine to engage in parliamentary dialogue as appropriate, coordinate closely with the OSCE chairmanship and executive structures, as well as other international actors, on the promotion of coherent actions on dialogue facilitations between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, and to give reports to the Standing Committee and raise awareness on developments in Ukraine and provide recommendations for the work of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. My mandate also includes contribution to the de-escalation of the current situation, exploration of all available venues to foster dialogue as appropriate and feasible, support for a peaceful resolution of the war and addressing its direct and indirect impact on all. In our last meeting in Birmingham, in the Birmingham Declaration, the Parliamentary Assembly welcomed my appointment to contribute to this dialogue. Being aware that it is very hard to call for a dialogue when bombs are falling, I am also sensitive that stopping the armed conflict and Russia's war against Ukraine requires everyone's intensive engagement and support. With this in mind, I have been engaged in a series of bilateral meetings with relevant interlocutors and interested parties, not only with representatives of Ukraine and the Russian Federation, but also with representatives of the OSCE institutions and executive structures, and other relevant international organizations and parliamentarians from different OSCE countries, like Turkey, to give an example. And I'm also close in contact with the task force of the IPU, the International Parliamentarian Union, on a peaceful resolution for the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it was immediately clear that the parties to the conflict are not ready to talk about ending the war in any other way than on the battlefield. The parties remain attached in these positions even today, 1 year since the invasion and after a cruel year of war. Therefore, my first task was to explain the essence of my mandate, to assist the parliamentary dialogue, which includes both components, talking, but also listening to the other side, in accordance with the ancient rule, audiatur et altera pars, listen to the other side. Unfortunately, it seems that my success in this endeavor is very limited. But let me use this opportunity to recall UN General Assembly resolution on the aggression against Ukraine dated by the 1st March 2022, which welcomed the continued efforts by OSCE to support de-escalation of the situation with respect to Ukraine and encouraged continued dialogue. In that sense, implementing the resolution and discharging my parliamentary assembly mandate, last year I had 35 meetings in total, out of which 25 were in person and 10 online. This year I continued with this meeting with relevant partners, including Ukrainian MPs or, for example, the Secretary General of Interparliamentary Assembly of CIS states. Our main topics here were prisoner exchange, global food security, and the safety of nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Colleagues, before I conclude, let me be clear. I will continue to use even the smallest opportunities for discussions with interlocutors if they can bring relief and improvement for the affected people on the ground. And we should never forget the ultimate recipients of the OSCE service are the people on the ground, the people who are suffering in a terrible way. Again, I would like to use the opportunity to thank the International Secretariat for their support, especially Ambassador Miodrag Panczewski. And I also thank Ambassador Halashinsky, the permanent representative of Poland to the OSCE and former chair of the BC, and Ambassador Kinnunen, special representative of the OSCE CEO in Ukraine, for their cooperation. And I look forward to the cooperation with the new BC chair, North Macedonia's Ambassador Igor Tuntiev. Concluding and in accordance with my mandate, I look forward to the time when we will be able to offer our contribution to a peaceful solution. Even it seems the time has not come, I am working and I will continue to give Ukraine the chance for their sovereignty and their territorial integrity in the internationally recognized borders. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Vice President Reinhold Lopatka. I will now pass the floor to the Chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Migration, Vice President Mark Pritchard. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me be clear from the outset, as we all know, that this refugee crisis that we're seeing throughout Europe is entirely down to the actions of Russia. Entirely. And just 13 months ago, when I was in Kyiv, people were out and about shopping like we all do in our capital cities. Children and families were playing in the parks and with their pets and living normal lives. But now that is fundamentally changed, and that is all because of the actions of Russia. And of course, there's been targeting and shelling on civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, schools, hospitals, old folks' homes, residential areas, targeted shelling at these areas, targeted rocket attacks at these areas. And of course, that has meant that families have had to flee. Families have been divided as their loved ones, both men and women, go to the front line to defend their borders, their country, their freedoms, and our freedoms. So the mass migration that we have seen, the mass flow of humanity across multiple borders that we all represent here today, was not the case 13 months ago, but is the case today, continues to be the case today as a result of Russia's actions. And this refugee crisis can end today, tomorrow, if Russia ends their illegal and brutal war against Ukraine. The destiny of so many people that we represent as parliamentarians, that we host in our own countries from Ukraine, is very much in the hands of the Russians. But we should be clear, and I think we have been as an assembly, that all of us stand united in ensuring that we will continue to host refugees from Ukraine for as long as it takes. We will continue to stand with Ukraine, not only in words, but in actions for as long as it takes. And there is no weakening of our resolve as an assembly, as a united Europe, as NATO and friends and allies and like-minded countries. There is no weakening of our determination to stand up for those people, those men, women, and children, young and elderly, that just 13 months ago were living normal lives. This assembly has and will continue to play a part. And I'm grateful for the work of the Secretariat and all of my staff on the Migration Committee. We've seen the human face of the tragedy, a tragedy caused by Russia. I'd like to thank all of those in this place today that represent countries that have generously and kindly hosted Ukrainian families and refugees. I can't name everybody, but I would like to call out positively Poland and the Czech Republic and Moldova. And can I just say, let us all be clear that we will do exactly the same for Moldova, because if it's Moldova next, it will be Romania next, and then it will be the Bulgaria next, it will be the Baltics next. And while some of us have different views about whether we should put more weapons in or slow down the pace of our support, it will mean more in blood and treasure for the United Kingdom and for every country represented in this room today if we do not stand more firm, more steadfast with Ukraine today, particularly on this anniversary. This is going to be a crucial few months. And we all have decisions. Many chairs of Foreign Affairs Committee are sat in front of me. Many chairs of defense committees are sat in front of me. Many senior parliamentarians are sat in front of me. Let us be doubly determined to go back to our governments and say, if we want peace, 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 and of course, blessed are the peacemakers. We all want to see peace. But if we want peace, 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 Ukraine needs weapons, weapons, weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Mark Pritchard and Chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Migration. Now I will ask Special Rapporteur on War Crimes and Head of the UK Delegation, Mr. John Whittingdale, to take the floor for 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Can I first of all thank you for inviting me to become the Special Rapporteur to the Assembly on War Crimes. However, it is shocking that in 2023, such an appointment should be necessary. In my capacity as Special Rapporteur, I have in the past year visited the International Criminal Court in The Hague, where I met the Deputy Prosecutor, the legal advisor, and the Special Assistant to the Prosecutor. I've also had meetings with the President of the Supreme Court of Ukraine and with senior judges, and I attended the special conference on the legal response to Russia's war, which was addressed by the head of the President's office in Ukraine and by the Attorney General of the United Kingdom. A year ago today, Russia invaded Ukraine in a blatant violation of international law, of Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, and of the Helsinki Final Act. Since then, there has been overwhelming evidence that Russia is guilty of war crimes, of crimes against humanity, of the crime of aggression, and of intended genocide. In October, the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine reported that war crimes, human rights violations, and international humanitarian law violations have been committed in Ukraine, with Russian forces responsible for the vast majority of identified violations. The OSCE report last April found clear patterns of violations of international humanitarian law by the Russian forces in their conduct of hostilities. A joint investigation team established by Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine with the support of Eurojust and the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC which is issuing an update this morning as we speak, and a preliminary investigation by the ICC has already found that war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed prior to 2022, including in both Crimea and Donbass, with evidence of willful killing, torture, rape, sham trials, and forced conscription. Ukraine's government has so far documented over 68,000 crimes of aggression and war crimes. According to UN OHCR data, almost 8 million Ukrainians have become refugees, and there have been over 18,000 civilian casualties, including more than 7,000 deaths. The Ukrainian government has recorded over 460 children killed and almost 1,000 injured. Civilians have frequently been targeted. In Mariupol, Russian forces bombed a theater where civilians were sheltering, killing 300. In Bucha, more than 360 civilians were killed and buried in mass graves. The UN OHCR has recorded over 100 cases of conflict-related sexual violence committed against Ukrainians, mostly women and girls. And over 2,500 education institutions, about 1,000 hospitals and medical institutions have been targeted by Russia, with 163 hospitals completely destroyed. In one case, Russian forces bombed a maternity hospital and children's ward in Mariupol several times, which the OSCE concluded was deliberate and was a war crime. Civilians have been subject to internment, forcible deportation, and separation from their families. Prisoners of war have suffered beatings, torture, the withholding of sanitation, food, and medical care. The Smithsonian Institute have identified over 1,600 incidents of damage to cultural sites. The Institute of Mass Information has documented over 470 crimes against media and journalists, including many threats, kidnappings, disappearances, and deaths. All of these constitute war crimes. The prosecution of those responsible will primarily be conducted by Ukraine. To support them and the Ukrainian domestic investigations, the UK, the EU, and the US last year established the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group. Already, there are about 65,000 active cases under investigation. The majority will have to be tried in absentia. However, there have been 3 in-person convictions of Russian soldiers last year. In March last year, 43 countries initiated a state party referral to the International Criminal Court, and ICC investigators are collecting evidence for future prosecutions. However, the ICC is unable to bring convictions in absentia, and heads of state have immunity from prosecution. Successful prosecutions in the past have only achieved following the defeat of an aggressor, allowing those guilty of war crimes to be put on trial. It is widely accepted that it is not enough to prosecute those who have directly committed war crimes, but that the Russian government and its leadership who initiated this war must be held to account. Given the limitations on the ICC, this can best be done by bringing a prosecution for the crime of aggression in a special international tribunal. Such a proposal has received support from the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, the European Parliament, and the OSCE. A core group of countries is now looking at how to ensure criminal accountability, including the feasibility of a hybrid tribunal to integrate Ukraine's national justice system with international elements. This could also consider the legal basis under which Russia can be made to pay reparations to Ukraine and to finance its reconstruction, the cost of which is already estimated at $800 billion. Madam President, holding Russia to account for its crimes is going to require unprecedented legal measures, but this assembly has already concluded justice must be done for the victims, for the people of Ukraine, and for the preservation of international law and the rules-based order. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. John Whittingdale. And now I will ask Special Representative on Political Prisoners, Mr. Steve Cohen from the US delegation to take the floor. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
very much, Madam President. And I thank you very much for creating this position and for honoring me with being the holder of the position. Colleagues, as we have gathered amidst the 1 year mark of the biggest geopolitical calamity the world has faced since World War II, I believe it's important that we talk about an issue that underpins this atrocity. The war in Ukraine in many ways has come about because President Putin is an unchallenged tyrant. If he's challenged, people are imprisoned or killed, which all of his critics and opponents have experienced or might experience. Boris Nemtsov was murdered just outside the Kremlin, no coincidence, on Putin's birthday. Now, Alexei Navalny is in prison, being slowly killed by 1,000 different opportunities to weaken his immune system and to kill him, just as Georgia appears to be doing with Saakashvili. In Russia and its puppet state of Belarus, civic activists, political opposition, journalists, anyone who dares to say anything truthful about the Lukashenko regime faces detention and imprisonment, which makes them political prisoners. In Russia, you've got Navalny, of course, but you also have the case of Vladimir Kara-Murza, whose case has come before this body for discussion. Twice poisoned when he visited his homeland of Russia, he returned again as a Russian politician and a patriot who wants to see and wanted to see a democratic Russia. He was soon arrested when he returned, faces trial soon, trial quote unquote, and I'm sure he'll see another 15 years on his sentence. Vladimir Kara-Murza, like Ilya Yasin and many others, Navalny, are heroes. My friend Vladimir told me once that the worst thing that can happen to a political prisoner is to be forgotten. Do not forget political prisoners. Do not forget Navalny. Do not forget Vladimir Kara-Murza. And do not forget the prisoners in Belarus, including Svetlana Saka, husband Sergei. Belarus has nearly 1,500 prisoners. Sergei should be president. I'm sure he got the votes, but he didn't count the votes. It was one of many illegal elections that Lukashenko has held, and he's arrested a Nobel Prize winner, Mr. Bieletsky. He also is in prison by Lukashenko. Because you don't speak up to Lukashenko, you don't talk to him, either sit down, pay homage, or you go to prison. People who are afraid of the truth arrest people who speak the truth. And if truth is not spoken, all the people of your country are censored from speaking out, censored from raising consciousness, and seeking the lives of the soldiers who are sent off to war by the war leaders. Leaders, they hide on trains, they hide in mansions, they hide everywhere but on the front. They go and they say that the people who die are heroes. There's another word for what they are. And I feel bad for the mothers and the wives and the children. That other word is they are dead. And the reason the Russian soldiers are dead and their wives are widows is Vladimir Putin. He's sending his people to death for his ego and his desire to be seen as the next Peter the Great. When he dies, even if he's put in the Kremlin next to Lenin, he's the same as the soldiers he sent to Ukraine to die. He is dead. Do things for the living. Political prisoners never forget them. They speak up. Russia and Belarus are human rights abusers. There are also other human rights abusers. In Georgia, we see Saakashvili also being killed. My principal job is on political prisoners as special representatives, collect information and disseminate it. I ask you to help me in disseminating it to your people and to your fellow colleagues and your legislatures. In the 7 months we've had this position, we tried to publicize the plight of the political prisoner. I've introduced a resolution designating October 30 as the International Day of Political Prisoners to highlight the great number of people behind bars for simply speaking up. The U.S. Helsinki Commission is helping with publicizing the individuals who we have highlighted. This position is important. I've heard from many people that have appreciated the creation of the position, and I'm honored to serve as the first chair of this position, the first special ambassador. I appreciate the authority that's been trusted in me, and I continue to work for the spirit and the memory of the political prisoners, each and every one of them. To the Russians, save your people, bring them home. Don't let more die. More will die today. More will die tomorrow. They will die, and the blood will be on your hands.
Thank you, Mr. Steve Cohen. And I would like to conclude this part of our General Assembly and thank all the distinguished speakers, but also all members of the International Secretariat who are supporting you with your work. And thank you for your time here and all your work that you are doing. It's really impressive. Thank you. I will now open the general debate. The time limit is set to 2 minutes. This because of the high number of delegates who have requested the floor. It's almost 60 delegates. So I kindly ask you to stick to the 2 minutes. First speaker on my list is Honorable Dr. Heidi Fry, head of the Canadian delegation. She will be followed by Ms. Barbara Bartos from Poland, head of the Polish delegation. Dr. Heidi Fry, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you all. I want to speak here as not only the head of the Canadian delegation, I stand to speak as a Canadian, a proud Canadian, and I stand to speak as a gender representative for the OSCE EPA. This is a day in which we have to do 2 things. We mourn, but we celebrate. We celebrate the strength, the resilience, the courage of the Ukrainian people. We have to come together. There are crimes against humanity. We saw this is about crimes against people. This is about starving people. This is about murdering people. This is about raping women who are the greatest victims of this war. This is about children. This is about all of the things that we valued, and Russia should remember it used to value that in the Second World War, when it fought alongside most of us against tyranny, against people who had crimes against humanity. It remembered the starving Russians during that war. Have they forgotten? Have you forgotten? Has Russia lost its humanity? Has it lost its ability to remember? Has it lost its ability to feel the pain and remember? Can it inflict pain on people like that? There should be no light between us in this room. We need to stand up for all of the women, the children, the starving, the food shortages, all of these things that Russia is doing, knowing that it is violating all the principles of Helsinki. Today, the United Nations condemned Russia and asked them to stop this war. I am suggesting, and I'm going to ask you to do one thing. Today is a day that we must not forget. And I am saying today is a day to mourn all of the crimes against humanity, all of the murder, all of the starvation, all of the crimes that Russia has inflicted on everyone here in this room. For shame, they should think of their own history. And they haven't. But I also want us to all, if you would please, stand up and applaud the resilience, the courage, and the strength of the Ukrainian people today and celebrate that. Thank you.
Next speaker on my list, Barbara Bartos is not here. I will give the floor to Mr. Ilie Dan Bama, head of the Romanian delegation. He will be followed by Senator Ben Cardin from United States. Mr. Ilie Dan Bama, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, exactly 1 year ago, Putin began his unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. I submitted to the Parliament of Romania declarations to mark 1 year of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine that in the days to come will be adopted by our legislative. In our declarations, we demand that the Russian Federation urgently withdraw its military forces within its own internationally recognized borders and return to the order of the international law. We reaffirm Romanian solidarity with Ukraine and all states targeted by the aggressive rhetoric of Russian Federations, and in particular with the Republic of Moldova. We call on the Russian Federations to cooperate unconditionally with international organizations and relevant institutions regarding war crimes committed by Russian army to the territory of Ukraine. Despite its severe losses in the operational field, Russia keeps in intentions to subordinate Ukraine politically and militarily. It proves its determinations to sustain a large-scale and long-lasting offensive operations with no discriminations between military and civilian populations and infrastructure, and it counts on undermining the cohesion of democratic states in supporting the Ukrainian causes. I considered that unity, shared values, and democracy are not simple statements, but actions and concrete results. Some of these also described in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly action on Ukraine presented by our Assembly President. The Ukrainian people are countering Russia's attack, determined to defend their legitimate interest on sovereignty and territorial integrity. Their resistance depends now on the political cohesion of the democratic countries, whose timely military and financial aid will influence the fate of the war. My mind goes now to the people of Ukraine that not only defend their country, but also share our democratic values. And the part of this, I'm sure Ukraine will win this war because humanity always in the end win. Slava Ukraina!
Thank you, Mr. Ilie Dan Bama. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Ben Cardin, member of the US delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Antonio Gomez Reiner from the Spanish delegation. Mr. Ben Cardin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the U.S. delegation, I first want to thank you and the Secretariat for bringing broad consensus among the Parliamentary Assembly in regards to Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, as reflected in the joint declaration presented by the U.S. delegation that has been circulated and approved by the Bureau. This is the 1 year solemn anniversary of Russia's clear, gross, and uncorrected violations of the 1975 Helsinki Final Act. We applaud the inspirational defense by the Ukrainians of their sovereignty. As parliamentarians, we pledge to uphold Ukraine's fully justified defense, never recognize Russia's illegal occupation, continue to isolate Russia, including the use of Magnitsky-type individual sanctions against those complicitous in Mr. Putin's war of aggression, and to seek accountability, including the use of all of our mechanisms, particularly as it relates to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of genocide perpetrated against the Ukrainian people. We support Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. The United States is unified in support of these actions, as evidenced by President Biden's visit to Kyiv and his speech in Warsaw. Congress has made that clear through appropriating $30 billion to help the Ukrainians in their defense. And our delegation to this winter meeting has made it clear through the interventions of all of our members, both Democrats, Republicans, House members, Senate members. And as legislators, we made that clear in our work with our executive branch, with Ambassador Carpenter, the United States is united in our support for Ukraine. Russia's military efforts must and will fail, as its attempt to use this forum to spread disinformation and propaganda. It has failed. We are united with Ukraine in its defense of the core Helsinki principles and its sovereignty. And this unity will help bring total victory for the Ukrainians. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Ben Cardin. Next speaker is Mr. Antonio Gomez Reino. He will be followed by Ms. Farah Karimi, head of the Netherlands delegation. Mr. Antonio Gomez Reino from Spain, the floor is yours.
Gracias, presidenta. Creo que hace un año todos y todas nos levantamos absolutamente sobrecogidos y sobre todo profundamente indignados y preocupados por la injustificable agresión de la Federación Rusa del señor Putin a Ucrania, porque en definitiva la guerra había vuelto a Europa. Creo que es clarísimo que partimos de un año de condenas clarísimas y severas. Sin ir más lejos, pues creo que las 3 condenas en la Asamblea General de Naciones Unidas han sido casi unánimes a la agresión rusa frente a Ucrania. Pero esta no debe ser, a mi juicio, simplemente una asamblea en la que hablemos de condena. Y lo dice alguien, además, que viene de una tradición política que probablemente estaría ilegalizada en el régimen ultraconservador y nacionalista del señor Putin. Pero tenemos que ir más allá y tenemos que tratar de activar espacios de diálogo y de diplomacia, porque necesitamos diplomacia y diálogo para conseguir sentar a Rusia en un alto el fuego, en una paz justa, en la investigación de todos los crímenes y también en que se haga una justa planificación de la reconstrucción. Y creo que tenemos que activar la diplomacia y el diálogo también porque necesitamos repensar el papel de Naciones Unidas y de esta organización y fomentarlos en un contexto de crisis de las organizaciones multilaterales. Y aquí estamos representados la mayor parte del hemisferio norte, pero el hemisferio sur también está hablando y creo que hay que escucharlo. Creo que hay que escuchar lo que están diciendo dirigentes como el señor Lula, como el presidente Petro, o también tenemos aquí sentado al Vaticano lo que ha dicho el Papa Francisco, que evidentemente nos están hablando de que es absolutamente intolerable lo que hace Rusia contra Ucrania, pero que también hay que abrir vías al diálogo, porque al final los que sufren en las guerras son fundamentalmente los pueblos. Ayer se ha dicho aquí que está venciendo la narrativa de la guerra frente a la narrativa de la paz, y que eso es un problema para la lucha contra el cambio climático, para los desafíos globales que tenemos, para las organizaciones multilaterales, para el control de la proliferación de armas en un contexto como el actual. Por lo tanto, desde la firme condena a Rusia, desde el firme apoyo a Ucrania, también necesitamos avanzar en la defensa de esta organización, del diálogo y, en definitiva, de buscar espacios para sentar a Rusia y para conseguir la paz. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Antonio Gomez Reino. Next speaker on my list is Ms. Farah Karimi, head of the Netherlands delegation. She will be followed by Mr. Asay Guliev, head of the Azerbaijan delegation. Ms. Farah Karimi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday, members of the UN General Assembly voted in favor of a resolution calling for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. The resolution demands that the Russian Federation immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw all of its military forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders and calls for a cessation of hostilities. Members of the Russian delegation present at this meeting have claimed that they came to engage in dialogue and seek peace. If that is indeed their goal, then they must take immediate action to fulfill the demands of the United Nations General Assembly resolution and end this senseless war. It is vital that Russia finally respects the fundamental principles of the UN Charter and the OSCE. Let us be clear, it is Russian soldiers who are on Ukrainian soil, not the other way around, and Ukrainian cities are under attack. Today, we urge the Russian delegation present here to have the courage and decency to speak the truth and not propagate false information. They must tell the truth to the Russian people that Mr. Putin's actions have brought only isolation and contempt for Russia and its people. Mr. Putin promised a blitzkrieg, but but he now finds himself facing a war of attrition. The Ukrainian people have shown immense resilience in defending their nation, and their unwavering belief in democracy, freedom, and respect for human rights and dignity is truly inspiring. We call on Russia to end the war, withdraw their troops, and enable the Ukrainian people to live in peace and security. Slava Ukraina!
Thank you, Ms. Farah Karimi. And I would like also to say thank you to all the speakers who are keeping the time limit of 2 minutes. Thank you very much for all your efforts with this. Mr. Asay will speak later. I will give the floor to Mr. Davor Benedict, head of the Croatian delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Vice President Askar Shakirov, head of the Kazakh delegation. Mr. Davor Benedict, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. President. 1 year ago, even though the Russian military troops were at the border with Ukraine, till the very last day, many of us hadn't expected start of Russian aggression on Ukraine. The biggest conflict after World War II that forever changed landscape of the world. International community and civilized world showed high level of solidarity by not only condemning aggression and starting to help Ukraine, sending strong message, we are not afraid, knowing all the risks of that act. Our parliamentary assembly showed also highest level of solidarity thanks to our leadership and all of you who are here today. But that opened one important question. What should look like our new role in these changing times? We have to think about it, and our organization urged to reshape. I'm proud that my country, Croatia, which recently went through all horrors of war, demonstrated high level of empathy and solidarity, and also organized first Crimea platform in Zagreb. Sooner or later, Putin will be history. Freedom will win, and we have to think about that moment. From our experience of recent war, there is a huge necessity for international criminal court, so the war criminals could face justice. It will not solve all crimes. It will not abolish all pain. It will not solve all suffer of destroyed families. But in those highly visible trials, it will regain some hope in justice to families of the victims. And it will be a cornerstone of future reconciliation. Just like it was, for example, in trial of Slobodan Milosevic. Ukraine today is fighting not only for its freedom, but for the freedom of whole modern world, for the values of solidarity and equality, for the universal human values. There should be no compromise on this. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Davor Benedict. Next speaker on my list is Vice President Askar Shakirov. He will be followed by Mr. Malik Ben Achor, head of the Belgic delegation. Vice President Askar Shakirov, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, throughout the year, since the beginning of the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine, within the framework of its mandate, the Parliamentary Assembly has been actively working to overcome it. A lot has been done. The action plan for Ukraine was adopted. The special representative of the Assembly for parliamentary dialogue in Ukraine was appointed. The leadership of the Assembly visited Kyiv. Unfortunately, the ongoing conflict undermines stability and security throughout the Eurasian space. Kazakhstan keeps an eye on the developments in Ukraine with great concern and is worried about the numerous loss of life, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the unprecedented number of refugees. My country has not recognized the referendums in the region of Ukraine. We provide humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian people. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev is in permanent touch with leaders of both states. Kazakhstan is invariably committed to the concept of comprehensive, equal, and indivisible security as enshrined in the Astana Declaration of the OSCE Summit in 2010. Russia is a natural security partner for Europe, as our security is indivisible. This country is a permanent member of the UN Security Council and an integral part of all conflict resolutions mechanisms in the OSCE. It is important to maintain a dialogue with Russia. It is necessary to combine all our efforts to achieve a truce and start peace negotiations. We need a goodwill of both, as well as support of the international community. Unfortunately, nowadays we are witnessing that the international community is divided. It is important for the OSCE, together with other international organizations and parliamentary assemblies, to continue a joint collective search for a peace formula by promoting all OSCE tools. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Vice President Askar Shakirov. Next speaker is Mr. Malik Ben Achor, head of the Belgian delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Sages Kandanyan, head of the Armenian delegation. Mr. Malik Ben Achor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Alors hier, aux Nations Unies, mon pays et 140 autres ont exprimé leur opposition à l'invasion de l'Ukraine par la Russie et ont exigé le retrait immédiat des troupes russes. Et seuls 7 pays se sont opposés au texte. C'est donc un message extrêmement fort et sans ambiguïté qui est envoyé par la communauté internationale, message auquel je me rallie bien évidemment avec conviction. Un an après le début de la guerre, il est urgent et nécessaire que la Russie se plie à cette exigence et rende des comptes quant aux crimes qu'elle a commis. La fin de cette guerre relève de la responsabilité de la Russie qui doit se rendre à l'évidence. Cette guerre ne peut pas être gagnée, elle est même déjà perdue. Admettre la vérité et mettre fin à la guerre est urgent pour au moins 3 raisons. La première va de soi, mettre fin aux souffrances du peuple ukrainien, souffrances qu'il n'aurait jamais dû subir. Deuxièmement, il y a un an, ici à Vienne, je m'exprimais, c'était la guerre commençait, je m'exprimais pour souligner que derrière l'enjeu de l'Ukraine, il y avait aussi un autre enjeu, l'expansion de l'influence chinoise. Et un an plus tard, plusieurs éléments nous font craindre l'implication croissante de la Chine dans cette guerre et nous ne voulons pas que dans une guerre longue, l'Ukraine devienne le terrain d'une guerre par procuration comme au temps de la guerre froide. Troisième raison, nous avons raison de fournir des armes à l'Ukraine pour qu'elle se défende. Beaucoup d'armes et beaucoup de matériel ont été livrés depuis un an. En septembre dernier, j'étais à Beyrouth et j'ai entendu le témoignage de Libanais, professeurs d'université, chercheurs, constatant que des milices libanaises étaient occupées à se réarmer avec des armes venant du territoire ou du terrain plutôt ukrainien. Le même constat est fait ailleurs, dans d'autres pays du Moyen-Orient, mais aussi en Afrique. Continuons résolument à aider l'Ukraine à rétablir son intégrité territoriale et soyons attentifs à la traçabilité des armes que nous livrons pour ne pas, sans le vouloir, rallumer des foyers de conflit et disséminer la guerre ailleurs dans le monde. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Malik Ben Achor. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Sergei Kandanya, head of the Armenian delegation. He will be followed by Ms. Barbara Bartos, head of the Polish delegation. Mr. Sergei Kandanyan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President, during yesterday's debates, the members of this assembly were talking about the unlawful blockade of the Lachin corridor by Azerbaijan and the necessity to immediately reopen it. Our Azerbaijani colleagues were opposing them with an argument that a few hundred trucks of the Red Cross and peacekeeping contingent has passed the corridor since December. My question is, since when have we started to count the trucks bringing food, medication, and fuel to our respective places of residence? Since when the freedom of movement has become an act of generosity, and how far it can go to mock the international community. Dear colleagues, while we are talking about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, our objective is not to perpetuate it, quite the opposite. We need the support of the international community to stop the cycles of hatred and violence in the South Caucasus. Therefore, I want to clearly affirm, Armenia believes that only peaceful dialogue can solve issues and establish stability and prosperity in our region. Armenia stands ready to advance the peace process with Azerbaijan with the mutual recognition of each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Armenia does not have territorial claims towards Azerbaijan or any of its neighbors. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is about the rights and security of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, and this should be addressed through an international visible dialogue between Baku and Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia is ready to open all transparent economic infrastructures in the region within the frames of the agreements reached on maintaining the sovereignty of the countries and jurisdiction over the roads. It has been more than 30 years that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict exists. I am younger than this conflict itself, and as a young parliamentarian, as a young decision maker, I do not want to leave this conflict as a legacy to the next generation. The motto of this year's chairmanship is, it's about people, and I hope we believe, that it's about the people of Nagorno-Karabakh as well, isn't it?
Thank you, Mr. Sargis Kandanyan. Next speaker on my list is Ms. Barbara Bartus, head of the Polish delegation. She will be followed by Mr. Damian Giurknuri, head of the Albanian delegation. Ms. Barbara Bartus, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, dear colleagues. It was a year ago when Russia invited Ukraine, as the last winter meeting was about to begin. Like everyone, I remember that day very well. Today, we are here in the Coburg with the entire Polish delegation. We want to say it loud and clear. Russia is responsible for this war in Ukraine. Russia is committing war crimes. Ukraine has every right to fight back. The ones responsible must be pointed out and they must be punished. The victims in turn must be supported until justice is responded. It is not easy for us to sit here at the same table with aggressors' delegation. We believe Russia should not participate in this meeting today on equal rights. Yes, our organization is a forum for dialogue, but this dialogue cannot be limitless in the light of the crimes being committed. Russia has banned itself from the ranks of civilized states, and the parliamentarians sitting here are part of this war. Until Russia returns to respecting international laws, we cannot treat it as our honest partner. There is no business as usual. Russia must remain isolated as it broke the fundamental rules of this committee. I believe we should work on finding the most effective way to judge Russia's aggression. Criminals should be held responsible. We are here today to fully support our Ukrainian friends. Poland has been helping since the first days of the war. With our open hearts on homes. We will continue this support and urge all participating states, as well as the OSCE, to help Ukraine. This illegal, baseless, brutal war has destroyed the foundations of the European and world security. Yes. I believe that we must continue to support Ukraine by all means possible, political, humanitarian, and military.
It's 3 minutes now.
Ukraine and the brave Ukrainian people are fighting for all us
and the speech, please.
Common security. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Barbara Bartos. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Damian Kiknuri, head of the Albanian delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Asay Guliev, head of the Azerbaijan delegation. Mr. Damian Kiknuri, the floor
Thank you,
is yours. Thank you.
Madam President. This organization is founded based on the principle of freedom, democracy, and the respect for international order. Unfortunately, these principles are being put into question by the aggression of one member, Russia, against Ukraine, which exactly 1 year ago scrapped this principle by waging the most brutal war in European continent since the end of the Second World War. This war has not only destroyed the lives of millions of innocent people in Ukraine, but has caused deteriorating effects in many fronts all over the world, in economic, security, and freedom terms. The stability of the world order is being put into question, and polarization between freedom-loving nations and autocratic regimes has deepened in the levels similar to the Cold War. If this aggression goes unpunished, and this war will not come to an end in a dignified way by rewarding the aggressor or yielding territory in exchange for peace, this will bring the end of the world order as we know up to date. The same goes for the Helsinki Principle, which this organization is founded on, by telling any potential future violator that if you are strong or happen to have nuclear arsenal or ability to impact the stability on a larger scale, this principle and rules mean nothing. The epilogue of this will be the great power politics of the world used to know 100 years ago, including its consequences. All the countries in this room not only must condemn this aggression, but act together unanimously in every front, including the economic one. It is unacceptable that some members condemn the aggression publicly, but continue to do business with Russia, hence feeding Putin's war machine to continue to kill innocent people. We also must draw lessons that peace and security is not something to be taken for granted in many of our regions, being in the Balkans or elsewhere. There are other mini-like Putins lurking here and there and waiting for the right time to endanger peace and stability. All pending issues left over from the past in the OSCE area, being in the Balkans or elsewhere, must be solved based on principle of dialogue, self-respect, and democratic spirit.
Thank you.
If we neglect that in the name of higher political goals, we do nothing but buy some time only to see Ukrainian tragedy repeated on a different scale. Therefore, all nations here must stand united together to support the peace and victory. Slava Ukraina.
Thank you, Mr. Damian Kiknuri. Next speaker is Mr. Asay Guliev, head of the Azerbaijan delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Andreas Aibi, head of the Switzerland delegation. Mr. Asay Guliev, the floor is yours.
Madam President, dear colleagues, before I speak, I would like to pay tribute to the victims of the Hocalı genocide as we commemorate the 31st anniversary of this tragic event. On 26 February 1992, the largest massacre against Azerbaijan civilians was committed by Armenia when 613 people were brutally murdered in one night. Madam President, I would like to reiterate that Azerbaijan has consistently expressed its position in support for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and inviolability of frontiers of Ukraine. Unfortunately, civilians continue to bear the major cost of the prolonged armed hostilities, and Azerbaijan continues taking consistent steps to help the people of Ukraine in dealing with dire humanitarian consequences of the present situation. Azerbaijan was one of the first countries to provide humanitarian aid to Ukraine immediately after the war, and these efforts continue today. Dear colleagues, unlike Armenian delegations' inflammatory rhetoric and hostile agenda, I prefer to focus on positive agenda and the pathways to achieve sustainable peace and prosperity in the region. Azerbaijan, immediately after the end of the conflict, initiated the process of normalizing of interstate relations with Armenia based on 5 basic principles. At the leaders' meetings held last year in Brussels, Prague, and Sochi, both sides officially confirmed their mutual recognition of each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and inviolability of borders based on UN Charter and Almaty Declaration of 1991. This can be a good basis for the peace agreement, which Azerbaijan is keen to conclude it as soon as possible. We are also seriously focused on the limitation and the migration of the state borders and unblocking of transportation and other communications. In this regard, we urge all politicians who are under influence of Armenian lobby to refrain from interfering into our domestic issues, which include our communications with Armenians, but rather direct their resources to compel Armenia to halt its continued illegal activities in the territory of Azerbaijan and refrain from actions or retaliate against their sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. Dear colleagues, on my final note, I would like to thank OECD member countries and international organizations, as well as Madam President, you for strong condemnation the deadly terror attack on the embassy of Azerbaijan in Tehran. Iran bears all responsibility for this terror attack, and we will call on comprehensive investigation to ensure that all perpetrators are brought to justice. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Asayguliev. And I do kindly ask all speakers to respect the time limit of 2 minutes. It's 67 speakers on the delegates who have requested the floor. So if we keep to 2 minutes, it will be possible to get the floor. Thank you very much. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Andreas Aebe, head of the Switzerland delegation. He will be followed by Vice President Pierre John Pons, head of the Spanish delegation. Mr. Andreas Aebe, the floor is yours.
Vor genau einem Jahr lancierte die Russische Föderation den Angriff auf Kiew. Dieser Krieg ist ein klarer Bruch der Charta der Vereinten Nationen und der Prinzipien der OSZE. Nach 12 Monaten erbitterter Kämpfe gibt es keine Anzeichen für ein Ende dieses schrecklichen Krieges. Im Gegenteil, seine Intensität nimmt weiter zu und er richtet sich auch direkt gegen Städte und zivile Einrichtungen. Zehntausende Todesopfer und Millionen von vertriebenen Ukrainerinnen und Ukrainer sind die Folge. Auch Russland zahlt einen hohen Preis. Es opfert seine Jugend und seine wirtschaftliche Zukunft für einen sinnlosen Krieg. Das Datum des 24. Februar 2022 ist ein Wendepunkt. Der bewaffnete Konflikt im Osten der Ukraine bestand allerdings schon seit 2014. Die Russische Föderation versucht die Invasion ihres Nachbarlandes mit vielen Behauptungen zu rechtfertigen. Moskau behauptet, die Bemühungen der europäischen Hauptstädte für eine diplomatische Lösung des Konflikts im Donbass seien nur vorgetäuscht gewesen. Als Präsident der Schweizer Delegation kann ich Ihnen versichern, die Bemühungen der Schweiz für eine diplomatische Lösung des Konflikts in der Ostukraine waren stets aufrichtig und unparteiisch. Und ohnehin, wie kann das Scheitern der Friedensbemühungen in der Ostukraine eine militärische Aggression rechtfertigen, welche die von allen Teilnehmerstaaten einschließlich der Russischen Föderation selbst vereinbarten Grundprinzipien in so eklatanter Weise verletzt? Wir haben viele weitere Rechtfertigungsversuche gehört, aber die Wahrheit ist, nichts kann das Land und die Grausamkeiten rechtfertigen, welche die ukrainische Bevölkerung seit nunmehr einem Jahr erdulden muss. Die OSZE ist eine Plattform, welche den diplomatischen Austausch ermöglicht, gerade auch unter Parteien, die nicht in allen Punkten gleichgesinnt sind. Die OSZE kann Regionen beobachten, demokratische Prozesse geeignete Maßnahmen, Transparenz und Vertrauen schaffen. Nutzen wir die OSZE und nutzen wir schaffen Europa. Danke.
Thank you very much. I have been informed that it's not here when I am saying time is out, and I have been asked to use the bell when the time is running out. I don't feel too comfortable to sit here and ring with the bell. I don't think it's proper, but I do kindly ask all delegates to really try to respect the 2 minutes time limits, and I maybe have to adjust to the bell. Next speaker, thank you, Mr. Andreas Saebe. Next speaker on my list is Mr. John Pons, Vice President from Spain. He will be followed by Ms. Siv Mossleth, head of the Norwegian delegation. Vice President Per John Pons, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Para no repetir algunas de las cosas que se han dicho, voy a hacer 7 reflexiones sobre lo que han dicho los panelistas. En primer lugar, Presidenta, quería decirle personalmente que me siento orgulloso de esta asamblea y de esta sesión. Yo creo que hoy todos somos ucranianos y le agradezco que haya mantenido el calendario de esta sesión porque demuestra que en un momento histórico estamos construyendo el futuro. Por tanto, gracias, Presidenta, en primer lugar. Todos somos ucranianos. En segundo lugar, me gustaría reaccionar también al señor Cohen. Nosotros somos más de 1.000 millones, somos la voz de más de 1.000 millones de personas y le agradezco al señor Cohen que nosotros somos la voz de todos esos ucranianos y de todos nuestros conciudadanos, pero también la voz de esos rusos y rusas que no tienen voz. Le agradezco que lo haya mencionado. También le agradezco a la señora de Rieder que haya hablado de día de condena. Hoy es un día de condena y como dijo Barack Obama, las palabras importan. Tenemos que condenar claramente, ¿no? Y lo tenemos que hacer con la fuerza de la palabra, que es la fuerza de esta organización. También al señor Weddingel, ¿no? Que decía, hablaba de la paz y la seguridad. Yo creo que hoy estamos dibujando la paz y la seguridad del futuro sabiendo que el proyecto de paz europeo y el proyecto de seguridad colectiva europeo están bajo amenaza. Y también quería reaccionar a lo que decía el señor Pritchard, que decía que necesitamos armar a Ucrania. Sí, tenemos que armar a Ucrania, pero al mismo tiempo tenemos que buscar vías de diálogo y de paz, que para eso estamos en una organización que se dedica a eso. Y quería terminar también diciendo que queremos una Ucrania europea. Como miembro de una delegación que va a tener el testigo de la presidencia de la Unión, vamos a trabajar para acelerar esa accesión de Ucrania a la Unión y, por tanto, también es un momento de construir una gran comunidad política europea. Es fundamental. Quiero terminar diciendo gracias otra vez y decir que la OSCE es un espacio de diálogo y también, sobre todo, un espacio de democracia. Lo que está en juego también aquí es la democracia. Por tanto, gracias a los panelistas y estos han sido los 7 puntos en los que quería reaccionar. Gracias.
Thank you, Vice President John Pons. Next speaker is head of the Norwegian delegation, Siv Mossleth. She will be followed by the head of the French delegation, Mr. Didier Paris. Ms. Siv Mossleth, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues who share our OSCE values and our respect for the Helsinki Agreement, an agreement which underlines human rights, freedom of the press, and respect for other borders. I deeply condemn the Russian delegation for coming to Vienna. You should not be here. You should all be home in Russia, working to pull out the Russian soldiers who are attacking Ukraine, who are attacking freedom. And if you are unwilling to do this, shame on you. We have seen a year of brutality and war crimes, of daily bloodshed, of millions fleeing and thousands of lives lost. Ukraine is defending its own territorial integrity, but Ukraine is also defending what is the most dear to us all. Ukraine is defending our freedom. Last week, the Norwegian government launched a new multi-year support program for Ukraine. Approx 7.3 billion euros. We were hugely grateful that President Zelensky was able to take part by video link at the launch. The program has broad cross-party support from the Norwegian Parliament and will be extended over 4 years. It's a promise that to be with the Ukraine over years. 1 year after Russia's unjustified full-scale invasion, Kyiv is standing. Ukraine is standing. Democracy is standing. Norway and the OSCE will stand with the Ukraine until the last Russian soldier leaves Ukraine. This winter meeting just shows how isolated Moscow really is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moshlet. Next speaker on my list is the head of the French delegation, Mr. Didier Paris. He will be followed by the head of the Slovakian delegation, Peter Osowski. Mr. Didier Paris, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Aujourd'hui est un jour anniversaire, mais c'est d'abord et avant tout un jour de deuil. C'est un jour où nous devons aussi constater l'échec de l'agression russe. Un échec sur le terrain, puisque contrairement à l'idée initiale, il ne s'agit en aucune façon d'une affaire de quelques jours. Bien sûr, grâce à la détermination exceptionnelle du peuple ukrainien et de son président Zelensky, aussi grâce au soutien massif que nous lui avons accordé. C'est aussi un échec dans le sens où le consensus est exceptionnellement large autour de l'Ukraine et nous voyons des modifications s'opérer, notamment quant au choix de la Finlande et de la Suède de rejoindre l'OTAN. C'est finalement un échec de la Russie qui est désormais une puissance de déséquilibre et de désordre. Face à cette situation, 10 paquets de sanctions ont été votés par l'Union européenne et nous faisons le vœu, en dépit du fait qu'elles n'ont pas été toujours avec des effets suffisants, nous faisons vœu que ces effets s'accentuent et que d'autres types de sanctions puissent être prises. Cette guerre a assez duré. Il faut que la Russie cesse ses attaques, que les négociations puissent être entreprises aux conditions de l'Ukraine. Il nous faudra, chers collègues, comme l'a tout récemment rappelé le président de la République française Emmanuel Macron, chers alliés, intensifier nos efforts pour mener la contre-offensive qui permettra là aussi la négociation aux conditions de l'Ukraine. Concernant notre Assemblée, je regrette évidemment l'absence de la délégation ukrainienne eu égard aux circonstances. Il nous revient de prendre très rapidement nos responsabilités pour qu'elle puisse revenir siéger à nos côtés. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Mr. Didier Paris. Next speaker on my list is head of the Slovakian delegation, Mr. Peter Osowski. He will be followed by Vice President
Lady
Pascal
President,
Alissard from France.
dear colleagues, yesterday I was really honored and touched that I could present to you the Ukrainian statement on the war. The Slovak Parliament accepted a few days ago a resolution declaring Russian Federation as a terroristic state. Our Prime Minister promised the Ukrainian side all Slovak MiG war aircraft that previously protected our sky. We in Parliament will do all possible to help to transfer these weapons to Ukraine. And that's the main point. As Honorable Pritchard wisely said, weapons, weapons, and weapons. Peace for Ukraine will come only as a result of military victory of Ukraine. Press, please, to your governments to do everything to help fighting heroic Ukrainian army. 1 year ago, in this hall, in my speech, I said that Russia should be forced to the knees. Mr. Tolstoy was quite angry. Today, he is here as the head of bunch of criminals and hangmans who serve the Hitler of the 21st century, Vladimir Putin. 36 days. Brought Bucha, Irpin, and many other Nazi atrocities. Let truth and justice prevail. Victory for Ukraine. Slava Ukraine!
Thank you, Mr. Peter Osowski. Next speaker on my list is Vice President Pascal Alissard from France. He will be followed by head of the Icelandic delegation, Ms. Helga Vala Helgadottir. Vice President Pascal Alissard, the floor is yours. Vice President Pascal Alessard is not here. Then I will give the floor to Ms. Helga Vala Halgodtir, head of the Icelandic delegation. She will be followed by Mr. Gustave Gras, head of the Luxembourg delegation. Ms. Helga Vala Helgadottir, the floor is yours.
Madam President, dear colleagues, there is no elephant in the living room. In our living room that stands for democracy and human rights, we have regrettably invited a delegation from a country that is breaking all the basic rules of our good society, going against all our values. They have shown that they have no interest in stopping their brutal war of aggression and human rights violation. In this room, we have representatives of a state that invaded a sovereign country 1 year ago, and every day since then has committed crimes against the Ukrainian people. They have murdered, they have tortured, they have raped, and they have kidnapped women, men, and children with the aim of exterminating the Ukrainian nation. Make no mistake that this is genocide. It is crimes against humanity, and that the perpetrators must be held accountable before the International Criminal Court. Dear Madam, we have to do better. We must support the victims of war and persecution in action, not just in words. Madam President, dear colleagues, we can't expect the victims to meet their perpetrators in a meeting room like this as nothing has happened. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly has to stand with and protect victims of the Russian invasion, and there should be no place for the Russian delegation in this room. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Ms. Helga Vala Helgadottir. Next speaker is head of the Luxembourg delegation, Mr. Gustave Gras. He will be followed by Mr. Michael Cred, head of the Ireland delegation. Mr. Gustave Gras, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Aujourd'hui, nous célébrons un anniversaire très triste. Ça fait 1 an que la Russie n'a pas seulement déclaré la guerre à l'Ukraine, mais à tout l'Occident. L'Europe n'a pas vécu une situation plus dangereuse depuis des décennies. Et surtout, l'annonce de Poutine d'utiliser, le cas échéant, la force de dissuasion nucléaire est une menace réelle pour la paix mondiale. On doit malheureusement constater que cette guerre pourrait entraîner un effondrement de l'architecture de sécurité transatlantique. Je profite de cette occasion pour condamner fermement au nom de la délégation luxembourgeoise l'invasion russe. Le monde libre et l'ensemble de la communauté internationale doivent réagir d'une manière efficace afin que l'ennemi subisse enfin une défaite stratégique. Ni en 2008 avec la guerre en Géorgie, ni en 2014 avec l'annexion illégale de la Crimée, l'Occident n'a réagi efficacement. Maintenant, l'heure de vérité a sonné. Il faut défendre avec toute ardeur et assurer les valeurs qui sont les nôtres. Je suis impressionné par la rapidité avec laquelle tant l'OTAN que l'Union européenne ont réagi face à cette attaque inadmissible. Dans un rythme sans précédent, ces deux institutions ont mis en place des sanctions sévères touchant gravement en premier lieu l'économie russe. L'appui de l'Ukraine par de nombreux pays mettant à disposition du matériel militaire et l'aide accordée aux nombreux réfugiés est sans doute un élément décisif de cette guerre atroce. Mon pays, le Luxembourg, certes doté d'une armée très modeste, a également fourni du matériel militaire à l'Ukraine et accueille des réfugiés. La solidarité envers le peuple ukrainien se manifeste à chaque instant et c'est fort louable. Jusqu'à présent, le Grand-Duché de Luxembourg a investi quelques 90 millions d'euros dans le support de l'Ukraine. Le dictateur russe, oui, c'est un dictateur, veut affaiblir la cohésion interne de l'Europe. Il veut désunir et défaire l'Occident. Il faut éviter à tout prix ce manœuvre, rassemblant toutes nos forces afin que la paix retourne le plus vite sur notre continent. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Gustave Gras. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Michael Cred, head of the Ireland delegation. He will be followed by Vice President Pia Kauma from Finland. Mr. Michael Cred, the floor is yours.
Madam President, as head of the Irish delegation, I'm pleased to be here in solidarity with our colleagues from the Ukraine against the illegal war perpetrated by Russia. It's 12 months on, and I think an appropriate time to take stock of what it is the OSCE can and can't achieve given its structure. I'm particularly impressed by the work being done by the Bureau on parliamentary dialogue, war crimes, political prisoners and migration. And pleased to say that in Ireland we have already provided accommodation to 75,000 Ukrainian migrants and will continue to support them in every practical way possible. The illegal invasion of the Ukraine poses the most profound questions as to the raison d'etre of the OSCE. And of course, we are not a military power, but I think we have moral authority and soft power beyond our imagination. And it's appropriate, I think, that we use that power effectively. I think our failing has been, in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that we have allowed the debate to be framed in a debate about the West versus Russia, when in fact this is an issue of global concern. So, Madam President, in the context of your own words, opening remarks where you said we should act decisively and be realistic about what we can achieve, I would urge us for the forthcoming period to look realistically, take the roll call from the United Nations last night, and there are indeed member states of the OSCE who unfortunately didn't support the UN motion. But there are, I think, opportunities for us to take our case globally, because this is a threat to global humanity. Look at that roll call, the member states of the United Nations that didn't vote, the 32 countries that abstained. I don't intend to dwell on the 7 that voted against, but the 32 countries that abstained, including China, India, South Africa. I think we need to take our case to them directly in the context of Parliamentary Assembly, and no better person than you, Madam President, and your team to do that in the immediate future. I think that is the way forward for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michael Cred. Next speaker is Vice President Pia Kauma from Finland. She will be followed by Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee from the US delegation. Vice President Pia Kauma, the floor is yours.
Madam President, dear colleagues, Russia started its full-scale war against Ukraine exactly 1 year ago. Since then, the course of events has gone from bad to worse. None of us have been able to stop it. Russia is currently violating international law in the most shocking way. To its people, it calls this a special operation, but news images of destroyed Ukrainian cities, killed soldiers, murdered children, their parents and grandparents tell a different truth. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians dead. If this doesn't fulfill the notion of war, I don't know what does. Let me remind you of the Helsinki Decalogue. It consists of 10 principles for guiding relations between states to maintain peace and security in Europe. With this war, Russia has violated every one of these principles. Russia must immediately withdraw from Ukraine. We need truce, peace negotiations and peace. Every new day of war means death to those defending their country, but also death to thousands of civilians and even medical staff against whom Russia deliberately attacks and whose possibility to get help Russia hinders. Former trade partners of Russia are currently increasing self-sufficiency because no one wants to trade with brutal murderers. The vast economic downfall will hit not only Ukraine, but also Russia. And will the war stop here? I'm currently looking towards my Moldovan colleagues. I can feel your anxiety and stress over the situation. I urge the OSCE, the European Union, our member states to do what we can do to stop this war and to make sure it does not spread out to new territories. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Pia Kauma. Next speaker on my list is Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee from the US delegation. She will be followed by Ms. Norma Heidegger from head of Liechtenstein delegation. Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President,
I think today should be declared the day of freedom for Ukraine. So many of us watched in horror of the vile, aggressive invasion of Ukraine. Today should be a day of freedom. We should wave the flag and we should realize that Russia is, in fact, a war criminal and has committed crimes against humanity. Let me tell you the story of what has happened to our children. Russian troops raped and tortured children, carried out execution, and committed other war crimes, genocide. Russian forces have relocated Ukrainian children to camps, and families across Russia were forced to adopt these children and to adopt these children for military training, genocide. The youngest children in these camps is 4 months old, genocide. Children have been raped, women have been raped, children have been executed, children have been victimized by brutal gang rapes, rapes committed in front of children, rapes of children. If you want to see something so low and so disgusting, why the Russian delegation is even here to recognize that they are vile as well. 100 cases of conflict related to sexual violence perpetrated by Russian forces. That is genocide. Why have there not been any reporting? Because children are vulnerable, they're innocent, and they cannot report. If you want to know about the horrors of children, a soldier forced a 4-year-old girl to perform oral sex on him in the presence of her parents. Her 22-year-old mother was raped and her father was also raped. I am standing for the children. If children are not recognized, as the Ukrainian delegation has asked us, 1, let us claim their freedom, but 2, let us go to our parliaments and declare that the kidnapping of children is wrong. It is an emergency. It's a crisis. The children of Ukraine are being reprogrammed, re-educated, and used to go into the military, fighting against their own homeland. Who are we? If we cannot stand for our children, we must stand for these children, and we must recognize that each child in our countries is precious. The Russians who are here are culprits with Vladimir Putin of denying the Ukrainian children their life. Fight for our children, demand freedom for Ukraine, and stand against the brutality and the horrors that are happening to children. It is a worldwide global issue. We should take it to the world. Slava Ukraini. Thank you, Michaela Jackson-Lee. Next speaker is head of the Liechtenstein delegation, Ms. Norma Heidegger. She will be followed by Miss Timea Sabo from Hungary delegation. Ms. Norma Heidegger, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, geschätzte Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Dieser Angriffskrieg dauert nun schon ein ganzes Jahr. Ein Jahr mit einem Angriffskrieg, der eine eklatante Verletzung des Völkerrechts und einen Bruch mit den fundamentalen Regeln der internationalen Ordnung darstellt. Liechtenstein verurteilt den Angriffskrieg Russland auf das Schärfste und fordert die Einhaltung der humanitären Völkerrechts und den Schutz der Zivilbevölkerung. Dieser Krieg Russlands gegen die Ukraine ist durch nichts zu rechtfertigen. Für die massiven Verstöße gegen Menschenrechte und humanitäres Völkerrecht durch die russischen Streitkräfte darf es keine Straflosigkeit geben. Liechtenstein hat in der OSZE unter anderem den Moskauer Mechanismus mitgetragen und befürwortet die Einrichtung eines Sondertribunals für das Verbrechen der Aggression. Wir müssen sicherstellen, dass die schwersten Verbrechen nach internationalem Recht zur Rechenschaft gezogen werden. Gemeinsam müssen wir mit aller Kraft in Europa und weltweit für den Erhalt, die Umsetzung und die Stärkung unserer Prinzipien einsetzen. Dazu zählen insbesondere auch das Festhalten und der Ausbau der kooperativen Sicherheit. Dabei sollten wir der OSZE eine führende Rolle zukommen lassen. Mit ihrer breiten Mitgliedschaft und ihrem auf dem Helsinki-Dekalog fußenden, umfassenden Sicherheitsbegriff bleibt sie eine einzigartige und inklusive Plattform für europäische Sicherheitsfragen. Wir bekräftigen unsere unerschütterliche Solidarität mit der Ukraine und unsere nachdrückliche Unterstützung für ihre Unabhängigkeit, ihre Souveränität und territoriale Integrität. Wir müssen den schwerwiegenden humanitären Auswirkungen des Krieges weiterhin unsere größte Aufmerksamkeit widmen. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you, Ms. Norma Heidegger. Next speaker is Ms. Timea Szabo from the Hungarian delegation. She will be followed by Mr. Selami Altinok, head of the Turkish delegation. Ms. Timea Szabo, the floor
Yes,
is yours.
thank you, Madam President. I understand that the Russian delegation is here today because on the very first anniversary of their brutal and unlawful war on Ukraine, because we cannot give up hope to engage in a sensible dialogue with Russia. Well, so be it, then here is my contribution to this dialogue as a member of the Hungarian delegation. Dear Russian delegates, your president, Vladimir Putin, is a war criminal. Your army, the Russian army, has been committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in the territory of Ukraine. Since exactly a year ago, Russia has been doing nothing by breaking all international law, by invading a sovereign country and attacking, torturing, killing, raping, and abducting innocent people, including women and children. Those who order and commit such actions are war criminals. When at a time of ceasefire, you bomb a children's hospital, killing infants and pregnant women and endangering them, you commit a war crime. When, according to a report by the Human Rights Ombudsman of Ukraine, members of the Russian army in Bucha kept at least 25 women in a basement, systematically raping them, then you commit a war crime. When Vladimir Putin's troops sweep through Ukrainian towns, leaving mass graves behind, then you commit a war crime. When the Russian army abducts hundreds of thousands of children and forcibly keep them in a closed camp, then you commit a war crime. This unlawful war must stop immediately. The Russian army must leave the territory of Ukraine immediately, and the perpetrators of this war and crime must be held accountable, because there is no peace without justice. And we at the OSCE must keep fighting stronger for this peace and justice. And yes, don't be surprised, this voice is coming from Hungary, because there are still millions there who believe in peace, democracy, and the rule of law in my country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Timea Szabo. Next speaker is head of the Turkish delegation, Mr. Selami Altinok.
Sayın Başkan, öncelikle Türkiye'de 6 Şubat günü meydana gelen yıkıcı depremlerin yol açtığı büyük can kayıplarının derin üzüntüsünü yaşıyoruz. Deprem felaketinin ardından taziyelerini ileten, destek ve yardım gönderen, arama kurtarma çalışmalarında yardımcı olan, bu faaliyetin açtığı yaraları sarmak için bizimle birlikte canla başla çalışan herkese teşekkürlerimi ve minnetlerimi sunmak istiyorum. Birlik ve beraberliğin önemini bir kez daha gördüğümüz bu felakette dostlarımız yanımızda oldu. Hepiniz sağ olun, var olun.
Esteemed President, first of all, we are deeply saddened by the great loss of life caused by the devastating earthquakes that took place on February the 6th in Turkey. I would like to express my gratitude to everyone who sent their condolences, support, and assistance, and helped in the search and rescue efforts and worked with us to heal the wounds inflicted by this disaster. In this disaster, where we once again saw the importance of unity and solidarity, our friends were with us once again. Thank you all.
Kıymetli meslektaşlarım, Ukrayna'ya yönelik savaşın başlangıcının trajik yıl dönümünü anıyoruz. Geride bıraktığımız bir yıl boyunca Ukrayna halkının çektiği acıya tanık olduk. Bu acılar halen sürmektedir. Ukrayna'ya yönelik bu yıkıcı savaş bir an önce durmalıdır.
Valuable colleagues, today we commemorate the tragic anniversary of the beginning of war against Ukraine. During last year, we have witnessed the suffering of the Ukrainian people, and it still persists. This devastating war against Ukraine must stop immediately.
Türkiye bu zor dönemde Ukrayna'nın ve Ukrayna halkının yanında olmuştur. Ukrayna'nın egemenliğini ve toprak bütünlüğünü desteklerken diplomatik çabalara da somut katkıda bulunmayı sürdürüyoruz. Karadeniz Tahıl Anlaşması ve karşılıklı esir değişimi gibi adımlar diplomasinin gücünü ispatlamaktadır.
Turkey has stood by Ukraine and Ukrainian people in this difficult period. While we support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, we continue to contribute concretely to diplomatic efforts. Steps such as the Black Sea grain deal and mutual prisoner exchange have proven the power of diplomacy.
Savaşın yıkıcı etkileri savaşın taraflarıyla sınırlı kalmıyor. Bu etkileri hepimiz hissediyoruz. Bunların giderilmesine yönelik uluslararası çabalara da katkı sağlamaya devam edeceğiz. Hepinize saygılarımı sunuyorum.
The devastating effects of the war are not limited to the parties of the war. We feel the impact of the war, and we will also contribute to the international efforts to eliminate them. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Selami Alfinot. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Nicholas Samkaradze, head of the Georgian delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Andrei Savinik, head of the Belarusian delegation. Mr. Nicholas
Thank you.
Samkaradze, the floor is yours.
Thank you. A short remark before I start my speech. It's very unfortunate that inaccurate information has been spread in this hall about a single criminal case in Georgia, contradicting both legal and humanitarian aspects of that case. So I urge everyone to make conclusions and statements based on facts and not perceptions. A year has passed since Ukrainians faced an unprovoked war of aggression by the Russian Federation against them, accompanied by numerous crimes and illegal actions. Russian aggression against Ukraine poses a threat not only to Ukraine, but also to Europe and the Helsinki Final Act as a whole. Georgia supports Ukraine politically at every international forum and in humanitarian dimension. Georgians were the first to witness the change of borders by force by the same aggressor 3 decades ago. Along its ongoing aggression in Ukraine, Moscow has intensified the annexation of occupied regions of Georgia, causing severe instability on the ground. As a result, the population is denied free movement. Georgian citizens are abducted and illegally detained. Georgian children are denied the right to study in their native language. Georgian villages are renamed and Georgian historical traces are continuously being erased. Our government, on the other hand, remains committed to peaceful reintegration of occupied territories. Today, everybody realizes the importance of Black Sea to European and global security, and Georgia, as one of the littoral states, is well positioned to play a significant role in security, especially now that we have intensified our efforts to facilitate regional peace and stability. Although the situation in our region is complex, Georgia remains committed to fostering rapprochement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We have proposed a peaceful neighborhood initiative that entails participation from all 3 South Caucasus states. Georgia has been serving and will continue to serve as an honest broker who is credible and trusted in both Baku and Yerevan. Our only intention is to ensure peace and security in the South Caucasus and normalize relations in the region. We condemn recent meetings of Belarusian authorities with representatives of occupied Abkhazia. We call on Belarus to respect sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia and to stop actions that go against fundamental principles of international law. And finally, I would like to use this opportunity to emphasize that the OSCE is essential for maintaining stability and security across Europe. Thus, this particular organization, this platform, must reconsider how it can respond appropriately and realistically to ongoing challenges and difficulties that pose a significant threat to the peace and stability of Europe, to the territorial integrity and sovereignty of OSCE participating states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholas Samkaradze. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Andrei Savinik, head of the Belarusian delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Richard Kuls, head of the Latvian delegation. Mr. Andrei Savinik, the floor is yours.
Уважаемый господин председатель, мы внимательно слушаем выступления делегаций на совместном заседании 3 общих комитетов вчера и сегодня. Ряд делегаций говорили о необходимости переговоров. Хочу их проинформировать, что доминант западного мира, Соединенные Штаты Америки, блокируют возможность переговоров и заинтересованы в затягивании военных действий. Мы в Беларуси уже имели возможность в этом убедиться. В отдельных выступлениях раздавались заявления, что установление мира требует увеличение поставок наступательных летальных вооружений в Украину. Любопытно было столкнуться с логикой, которую предсказал известный британский писатель-фантаст Джордж Оруэлл в романе «1984 год», который писал о далеком будущем стран коллективного Запада. Мир – это война, искаженная и опасная логика, а точнее ее отсутствие. И в этой связи я хотел бы отметить, что мы знаем, что страны Запада поставляют летальное оружие, поощряют своих граждан принимать участие в вооруженных столкновениях в качестве наемников, так называемых шакалов войны. Я убежден, что когда война будет завершена, появится новая Украина без неонацистов. В этом случае эти страны должны будут понести ответственность за свои действия, в том числе финансовую, для восстановления тех разрушений, которые были нанесены западным оружием. Принцип ответственности будет использоваться в отношении всех стран, без исключения. Прошу об этом не забывать. Благодарю за внимание.
Please change on the speakers list, and I will give the floor to Mr. David Stockmiller from Austria. The floor is yours. He will be followed by Mr. Grigory Karasin from Russian Federation. Mr. David Stockmiller, the floor is yours.
Dankeschön, Frau Vorsitzende. Lassen Sie mich eines klarstellen. Russlands brutaler Angriffskrieg auf die Ukraine ist auf das Schärfste zu verurteilen. Und das haben wir jetzt auch wieder in dieser Rede von Belarus gehört. Russland tritt in der Ukraine seit einem Jahr nicht nur das Völkerrecht, sondern die Grundsätze der Menschlichkeit mit Füßen. Seit einem Jahr ist klar, dass Putin das zu Ende zu bringen versucht, was er 2014 in der Krim in den Weg geleitet hat, die Unterjochung und Auslöschung der ukrainischen Demokratie und der ukrainischen Identität. Die unvorstellbare Zerstörung und das unvermessliche Leid von so vielen Ukrainerinnen und Ukrainern ist allein Wladimir Putins imperialistischen Traumvorstellungen zuzuschreiben. Hier gibt es kann es kein, zwei Seiten, keine geteilte Schuld geben. Die Schuld liegt alleine, ganz alleine zu Füßen von Wladimir Putin. Es wird mit Russland in seiner jetzigen Form nie eine Rückkehr zum Status quo ante geben. Russland wird erst wieder ein Teil der internationalen Gemeinschaft der Staaten sein können, wenn kein Russe mehr in der Ukraine ist, wenn die Souveränität und die Integrität von der Ukraine gewährleistet und von Russland anerkannt ist und wenn Wladimir Putin Geschichte ist. Wenn dieser Tag kommen wird, lässt sich heute noch nicht absehen. Aber es wird einen Tag danach geben. Der Tag, an dem russische Truppen die letzte Schlacht verloren haben, an dem die Krim, der Donbass und alle annektierten Regionen wieder Teil der Ukraine ist und der Wiederaufbau der Ukraine begonnen hat. Als demokratisch gewählte Delegierten ist es unsere Pflicht, an diesem Tag zu denken und den Weg für ein friedliches Ende der Kampfhandlungen und der Rückkehr der Diplomatie offen zu halten. Es reicht nicht, auf diesen Tag zu warten. Die OSZE kann und muss Teil der Lösung sein. Ihre Strukturen müssen diese lange Nacht überdauern und mithelfen, diesen Tag herbeizuführen. Als größte regionale Sicherheitsorganisation der Welt können wir uns nicht leisten, Diplomatie gegen Einseitigkeit, Kommunikation gegen Verbannung einzutauschen. Die russische Delegation hat gestern und jetzt gerade und heute bereits lautstark gehört, dass wir vereint mit einer Stimme und Schulter an Schulter mit unseren ukrainischen Schwestern und Brüdern stehen. Und wir werden das nicht aufhören, damit aber auch diese lange Nacht aber endet und hoffentlich bald endet und die Sonne unter Tag wieder aufgeht, müssen wir die Möglichkeit des Dialogs offen halten. Und dazu braucht es eine starke und gute OSZE. Vielen Dank, werte Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Thank you very much, Mr. David Stockmiller. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Grigory Karasin from the Russian Federation. He will be followed by Mr. from the Russian Federation.
Неприемлемым является стремление погрузить анализ драматических событий на Украине в атмосферу ненависти, злорадства и провокационных призывов.
такой обстановке серьезный диалог по расширению кризиса просто невозможен. Так же, как и невозможен прогресс в обстановке запугивания, изоляции представителей отдельных государств ОБСЕ путем прекращения диалога с ними. Каналы коммуникации по серьезным проблемам должны быть открыты. Это доказанная историей истина. Причиной украинского кризиса стали процессы, порожденные государственным переворотом 2014 года, последовавшие за ними атака на русскоговорящее население, откровенная русофобия нынешнего киевского режима и радикальный национализм. Катаклизмом драматического развития стала активная работа США и НАТО по вовлечению Киева в процесс расширения этого военно-политического блока, его продвижения к российским границам. Призывы западных столиц выиграть войну с Россией на поле боя глубоко провокационны. Если добавить к этому возрастающие поставки летального вооружения Киеву, то складывается трагическая перспектива для большого евразийского региона. Вчера и сегодня многие здесь говорили не об урегулировании, а о наказании, о трибуналах. Прошу учесть, что запугать Россию таким языком невозможно. Мы сражаемся не с Украиной, а за стратегическую стабильность и предсказуемость на будущее. Это весьма непросто, но другого выхода у России, да и международного сообщества нет. Стабильность и здравый смысл должны победить. Мы здесь услышали о заявлении сенатора Уикера, с содержанием которого принципиально не согласны. Поэтому вместе с представителями Белоруссии просим секретариат приобщить наше особое мнение к документам нынешней ассамблеи. Спасибо.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Gregory Karasin. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Leonid Slotsky, Russian Federation. He will be followed by Mr. Andrei Lima. Mr. Lima, the floor is yours.
Большинство хочет слышать о том, что подлинный геноцид в течение 8 лет был против жителей регионов Украины, которые хотели всего лишь навсего воспитывать детей на родном для них русском языке. Более 10 тысяч человек, в том числе людей пожилых и детей, были зверски убиты. Вот подлинный геноцид. Ядерное оружие, вот чем захотел обладать Зеленский в начале прошлого года. И это явилось основанием для святой и благородной специальной военной операции, будем надеяться, последней в истории человечества, схватки с нацизмом. Вот что явилось основанием для начала данной операции. И, наконец, мы должны понимать, что нацизм несут именно те, кто сегодня стоит за марионеточным киевским режимом. Я прошу представителей Словакии, Венгрии и других государств прекратить нападки на президента России. Это трусливо, подло и не соответствует принципам нашей организации. Обращайтесь ко мне. Я нахожусь здесь, я отвечу вам. Президент России не находится в этом зале. И хочу сказать, я один из 4 переговорщиков, назначенных президентом России год назад. Мы достигли серьезных успехов, но украинская сторона, к сожалению, откатила назад. Они хотят воевать. Это их выбор. Мы сегодня здесь, потому что мы готовы к переговорам. И кто не является трусом, и кто является подлинным политиком, мы готовы к переговорам на площадке нашей организации. Слава защитникам России!
Thank you, Mr. Leonid Slutsky. Next speaker on my list is Mr. André Coleo Lima, member of the Portugal delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Kyriakos Hariani from Cyprus delegation. Mr. André Coleo Lima, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, to those who are present and those who are hearing on the phones, three thoughts I want to share with you. The first, a word of deep thanks to Sweden. Thank you for bringing to this meeting Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya. Politics is made by statements, and we thought this is a great statement. We all could have done it, but Sweden did it, and we should be thankful for Sweden for doing it. Second word, second thought, to Turkey. First of all, of course, of our deep regrets for the numerous dead and injured following the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, but also for the diplomatic effort Turkey is trying to make on the barbaric military conflict due to Russia's invasion to Ukraine. And I must say, it's not just a coincidence to have a word for Sweden and for Turkey in the same intervention. Third thought, a strong word of condemnation to Russia. No, we don't want to just leave the room when Russia speaks. We want to be here. We want to speak to the Russian delegation face to face, not turn our back to them, but turn our faces towards them. Hear them if we want them to hear us, and then tell them that Russia should be ashamed of the cruelty it's inflicting to men, women, elderly, and children in Ukraine, that Russia should be ashamed of disrespecting international law, that Russia should be ashamed of a brutal and unprovoked invasion to Ukraine, that Russia should be ashamed for its medieval expansionist goals, and also tell them that we are convinced, we are deeply convinced that Russians, that the people from Russia does not uphold these actions and that they are with peace and with humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. André Coelho Lima. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Kyriakos Adriani from Cyprus. He will be followed by Mr. Costel Nikolai Grunava from Romanian delegation. Mr. Kyriakos Adrianos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to speak as a special representative for civil society. When a year ago, the Russian army invaded Ukraine, they kept 6 lists of names of active people in civil society: journalists, NGO activists, lawyers, retired officers, members of the LGBTQI community, and they were registered with the aim to be identified and exterminated so that they would not be able to organize a resistance network when Ukraine would fall into their hands easily, as they believed then. The blow that Ukraine civil society has received is severe. Just 1 year after the invasion, more than 70,000 war crimes have been reported. Attackers have committed more than 500 crimes against journalists and the media, including shooting of journalists, kidnapping, and cyber crimes. The number of deportation of Ukrainian citizens to Russia is also frightening. Important is the contribution of the Ukrainian civil society, NGOs that take care to record and collect evidence of the crimes of the Russian army, as well as data on the situation in the entire country, like that of informing public opinion through the press and social media. Also, thanks to the action of Ukrainian NGOs, millions of dollars in aid have been collected. NGOs mobilized to help resettle Ukrainian refugees who were forced to leave their homes, working directly with Airbnb, and not only. Ukrainian NGOs are the ones expected to play a key role in the reconstruction of the countries after the war and for the restoration of the full functioning of the country's democratic institutions. Ukrainian NGOs remind Europeans of a great truth. There is absolutely no problem that governments can solve on their own. The contribution of NGOs is literally the enabling and necessary condition to deal with the multiple crises. The organized efforts, therefore, by seekers of all forms of powers to discredit to discredit and demonize the action of NGOs are not only unethically, it is dangerous. It is very dangerous. The citizens of Ukraine, the civil society of Ukraine, the people of Ukraine will win. And their actions both on the battlefield and in society will remind the God it seems to have forgotten. It is a nightmare for me that this war becomes a habit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kyriakos Hariani. He will be followed by Mr. Costel Nicolai Dunava from Romania, followed by, no, next speaker is Mr. Costel Nicolai Dunava from Romania. He will be followed by head of US delegation, Mr. Joe Wilson. Mr. Costel Nicolai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, during the last year, our entire activity focused on two main directions: securing support for Ukraine and isolating and blaming Russia. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine is an attack against the entire rule-based international order. However, even in these challenging times, OSCE has shown its relevance with its structures, field operations, and autonomous institutions providing support for Ukraine. Romania believes that the return to a reasonable level of regional security depends on the restoration of peace, but not a coercive and temporary peace. Ukraine and the entire Europe needs a fair peace based on viable security guarantees assumed by the great powers. It also needs a reasonable flexibility in negotiations for the construction of a new sustainable architecture of security. This includes viable international agreements and treaties. We stand in full support to Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, as well as Kyiv right of self-defense. In the same time, the democratic order has the moral duty to keep its unity against this illegitimate attack by a member state of the UN Security Council. Along with like-minded EU partners, we will support Ukraine as long as it will be necessary. We have supported Ukraine and will continue to do so, as it is normal in this kind of situation. However, Ukraine has to understand as well that the dragging of the Burstroye Canal without finding a solution to protect the Danube Delta, a site in the UNESCO World Heritage, is against European democratic principles which the country claims they want to respect. Thank you. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Costel Nicolai Dunava. Next speaker is head of the US delegation, Mr. Joe Wilson. He will be followed by the head of the Latvia delegation, Mr. Richard Coles. Mr. Joe Wilson, the floor is yours.
Madam President, colleagues, what an honor to be here today. And I'm really going to restate what I said substantially yesterday, and that is that the bravery and the courage of people of Ukraine have remarkably brought together in the United States Republicans and Democrats. There's no issue that's pending in Congress or before the American people than the unity that we have of support of the people of Ukraine because of the inspiration that they have been and are. Additionally, it's so exciting to be here with Senator Ben Cardin and see the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. Yesterday, we could have hypothesized that there would be a coming together. But goodness, Director Montella, we see it come together, and it's just delegation after delegation of countries that, particularly those of us in America, we have diasporas of virtually of every country here, and so you are beloved, and to come together is just so exciting, and so we just need to all stick together. And then an encouragement I have for my colleagues of the of another political party, I hope that they will be working with our president to expedite the latest military equipment so that the people of Ukraine can continue to be successful. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Joe Wilson. Next speaker is head of the Latvian delegation, Mr. Richard Coles. He will be followed by Vice President Pascal Alisard. Mr. Richard Coles, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. As milestones go, the Russian full-scale invasion
1-year anniversary is both grim and vexing. It marks a full year of killing, destruction, terror, loss, and pain felt even far beyond the borders of Ukraine. It also marks the simple yet empowering realization: Ukraine is still here. That in itself is a stinging defeat for the Kremlin. Throughout this year, we are collectively stumbled a number of times. I myself have done my fair share in maintaining a sense of much needed urgency in our support to Ukraine. But let's allow ourselves to take a moment to consider where we were a year ago and where we are now. A year ago, they said and thought that the liberal democracies, paralyzed by greed and naivety, will implode, and the West, supposedly irreparably broken and failing, will bark much louder than it will bite. And yet, that tired old West turns out to have remarkable willpower. From the Nordics shipping anti-tank missiles to Germany, bringing the Leopards, to cutting off Russian gas and oil flows, metaphorically and physically, into Europe. I must admit, I did not think that this was truly possible. It is a marvel and a credit to the values we postulate, and as it appears actually hold us sacrosanct. Russia is already on borrowed time, fighting with its own demons, Satanists, drug addicts, Nazis, and Christians, whatever is their delusion of the weak, are firmly on their way towards the brink of no return, all based on lies. Russia is a country stuck in a quicksand of myth. Ukraine, with their voices, their protests, and their defiance, and their struggle and commitment to fight until victory, have pushed their way into confident, determined, and resilient nation on its path towards wherever and whatever it chooses. And today, I want to convey a message to our Ukrainian colleagues. Razom do перемоги. Together till victory. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard Coles. Next speaker on my list is Vice President Pascal Allizard. He will be followed by head of the San Marino delegation, Mr. Oscar Mina. Vice President Pascal Allizard, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame le Président, mes chers collègues. Je voudrais démarrer mon propos en adressant à mes collègues turcs toutes mes condoléances, mon soutien, ma solidarité pour le tremblement de terre qu'ils viennent de subir et pour toutes les victimes. Redire aussi, à l'instar de plusieurs collègues, ma condamnation totale de l'agression russe en Ukraine, et j'ai eu l'occasion de le dire à plusieurs reprises à nos collègues et amis ukrainiens. Je voudrais donner un éclairage particulier sur ce conflit qui est la situation en Méditerranée, puisque Madame la Présidente, vous m'avez désigné comme représentant spécial pour les affaires méditerranéennes. Depuis 2 jours à Vienne, j'ai rencontré les délégations marocaines et les délégations algériennes et j'ai aussi fait le point avec les représentants permanents d'Israël et d'Égypte, et je maintiens des contacts avec nos collègues tunisiens et jordaniens. Et je voudrais vous dire, mais vous le savez toutes et tous, que ce conflit en Ukraine, par la faute de la Russie, a aussi des conséquences que l'on pourrait qualifier de collatérales, mais qui en fait sont très directes et très concrètes sur le fonctionnement et sur la situation de nos pays partenaires de la Méditerranée, des problématiques énergétiques, des problématiques de sécurité alimentaire et des problématiques d'inflation. Et je terminerai mon propos, parce que le temps m'est compté, sur la situation de la sécurité en Méditerranée, pour une fois de plus dénoncer la position de la Russie qui a renforcé son dispositif militaire alors qu'il n'y avait que quelques navires d'appui au port de Tartous. On compte actuellement plus d'une quinzaine de navires de guerre russes en Méditerranée et la présence d'au moins 3 sous-marins. C'est une agressivité supplémentaire, ce sont des tensions supplémentaires qui ne sont pas de bons signaux dans le signe de la désescalade. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Vice President Pascal Alissard. Next speaker on my list is Head of San Marino Delegation, Mr. Oscar Mina. He will be followed by Mr. Oscar Mina, the floor is yours.
Grazie Presidente. Volevo richiamare l'attenzione di questa assemblea su di un aspetto da non sottovalutare in questo conflitto russo-ucraina. E mi riferisco alla disinformazione e alla sua propaganda che sta dilagando in maniera esasperante. Ho voluto menzionare questo tema proprio perché mai come oggi, dopo un anno di guerra, con una modalità di conflitto che si è protratta con missili, bombe, carri armati, eccetera, oggi la diffusione di fake news, di virus informatici, eccetera, sta facendo dilagare a dismisura questa disinformazione su questo conflitto. Ho voluto proprio menzionarlo in questa assemblea proprio perché non è stato ancora posto all'attenzione il pericolo della disinformazione in questo conflitto che sta diventando una vera e propria arma di guerra, ovvero tutto è diventato propaganda e tutto è diventato contropropaganda. La disinformazione è la parte integrante di strategie di guerra, almeno pare, della Russia, in grado di sovvertire questo equilibrio geopolitico all'interno della regione dell'Osce. Tra l'altro sono stati identificati circa 358 siti attivi ad oggi, in cui la maggior parte di queste notizie false negano le atrocità perpetuate soprattutto dalla Russia in Ucraina, demonizzando appunto gli stessi ucraini. In conclusione, credo sia necessario che la nostra organizzazione debba assolutamente esortare gli stessi parlamenti e i parlamentari nazionali affinché le notizie siano una modalità di tutela anche della corretta informazione a tutti i livelli, a partire dai social media fino alla carta stampata. E questa è una sfida che dobbiamo combattere perché sta devastando l'opinione pubblica su questo conflitto russo-ucraina. Noi siamo ovviamente a sostegno di questo tragico evento che ci sta veramente devastando tutti quanti. Grazie Presidente.
Thank you, dear colleague. Now the floor is for Mrs. Lucy Potukowka from the Czech Republic, and after from Mr. Kerstin Village from Germany. Mrs. Potokov, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, we in the Czech Republic still have in our fresh national history the year 1968 and your invasion, Russian Federation. At that time, you call it a friendly help to brothers. This help has left dead and wounded. Thousands of people from social elite who dared to express their disapproval of your amicable visit had to leave the country. It took us 33 years to expel you from our homeland. And you always copy the same pattern. You rob, you kill, and you rape. That is what you do to your neighbors, to your brothers. But the survivors, victims, and witnesses are speaking, and we are listening very intently. We send money, equipment, and weapons to our Ukraine friends, and they thank us. But that's us who should be grateful, and thank to each single Ukraine soldier who had to pay by his life or health for our freedom, for our principles, and for our elementary values. Ukraine is bleeding also for our peace, and they must not stand alone. We stand with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, dear colleague. Now the floor is for Mr. Kerstin Virjek from Germany, and after it will be Mrs. Maria Karapetyan from Armenia. Mrs. Virjek, you have the floor.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, ich spreche zu Ihnen an diesem höchst historischen Tag. Vor genau einem Jahr begann der völkerrechtswidrige und menschenverachtende Angriffskrieg Russlands gegen die Ukraine. Dass heute an diesem Tag hier bei der OSZE-PV russische Parlamentarier anwesend sind, die diesen Krieg verteidigen und rechtfertigen, erachte ich als unwürdig. Wir als OSZE-PV sind die Plattform für den diplomatischen Dialog. Aber wir müssen uns fragen, Ist ein zielführender diplomatischer Austausch mit der russischen Delegation möglich oder bieten wir Putins Schergen lediglich eine Plattform zur Selbstprofilierung? Angesichts der Redebeiträge der russischen Delegation am gestrigen und heutigen Tage kennen wir die Antwort bereits. Russland interessiert sich nicht einen Herzschlag um eine diplomatische Lösung. Wer angesichts der massiven und gravierenden Kriegsverbrechen der russischen Armee in der Ukraine sich hier und heute hinstellt und die Rhetorik des obersten Kriegsherrn Putin assimiliert, der hat es nicht verdient, an diesem geschichtsträchtigen Tag zu sprechen. Dieser schreckliche Krieg ist das Resultat einer verkorksten Großmachtfantasie von Wladimir Putin. Sie, Russen, leben in einem Paralleluniversum. Die Ukraine dafür verantwortlich zu machen, dass dieser Krieg noch andauert, ist nicht mehr als eine groteske Täter-Opfer-Umkehr. Deshalb muss die Ukraine dazu ertüchtigt werden, sich der russischen Aggression so lange wie notwendig zu widersetzen. Alle Staaten müssen noch mehr und noch schneller Waffen liefern. Ich rufe Sie hierzu auf. Hierfür einzustehen, das, meine lieben Kollegen, ist unsere Pflicht als demokratisch gewählte Volksvertreter. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you, Mrs. Virej. Now the floor is from Mrs. Maria Karapetian from Armenia, and the next will be Mr. Thibault François from France.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, Armenia lives in a difficult neighborhood. The Armenian people's dominant self-perception is that we belong to the democratic world. However, Armenia cannot change or fight against its own geography. Neither can it change the already inflicted historical legacies of the past empires. What it definitely can do is keeping its commitment to an internal democratic order deriving from the will of the Armenian people, while exerting maximum effort to keep good neighborly relations and cooperations with its friendly neighbors and work towards normalizing relations with its aggressive neighbors, with an implicit hope that they will too take a democratic turn sometime in the future as well. Coming into a very specific question, how the international community can contribute to security, peace, and democracy in our region between Armenia and Azerbaijan. First and foremost, Azerbaijan's energy resources and economic cooperation should not be leveraged on the European countries. The opposite, economic cooperation should be conditioned with a clear agenda of security, peace, and democratization for the South Caucasus. Secondly, the international community should be consistent in its position that long-lasting peace in the region is possible only in the case of a comprehensive settlement addressing the rights and security of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, with a strong presence and engagement of the international community. It is only this way that Armenia can stay out of the destructive dynamic into which Azerbaijan, supported by third countries, wants to drag Armenia into. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleague. Now the floor is for Mr. Thibault François from France, and the next will be Mr. Basile Bolea from Moldova. Mr. François, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président Alizard, chers collègues. Je me permets en propos liminaire d'indiquer que l'opinion qui suit ne représente pas la position diplomatique de la France et donc je m'exprimerai à titre personnel. En ce jour qui marque tristement les 1 an de l'invasion russe de l'Ukraine, cela n'a que trop duré. Et pour quelles conséquences? Nous sommes à plus de 300 000 morts, des enfants enlevés, des milliers de déplacés et de réfugiés, des crimes abominables, une économie et un pays en ruine où tout est à reconstruire. En préparant mon intervention, je voulais dire qu'il fallait trouver un issue strictement pacifique à ce conflit. Je le pense toujours, mais je crains que cela soit très difficile après l'intervention du président Poutine lors de son dernier discours sur l'état de la nation. Je rappelle également que l'agression de l'Ukraine par la Russie représente la violation de la souveraineté d'un État et que c'est inacceptable et représente une violation très grave du droit international. Oui, il faut en finir avec ce conflit initié par la Russie, mais pas en finir avec la Russie. Elle restera toujours notre voisine, personne n'a intérêt à être en conflit avec elle et personne ne veut l'anéantir. Les frappes continuent cependant sur l'Ukraine et sont toutes injustifiables et ne participent pas à la nécessaire désescalade des tensions. Se retirer du traité New Start et demander à son ministère de la Défense de se tenir prêt pour des tests d'armes nucléaires non plus. Toutefois, nous devrions nous questionner sur l'envoi d'armements lourds à usage cette fois offensif et non plus défensif. On voit clairement que les lignes rouges et déclarations d'intention d'il y a un an en matière de livraison des armes n'est plus la même. Alors ces livraisons ne participent évidemment pas de la désescalade d'un conflit et impliquent toujours davantage les alliés, mais jusqu'où? Quand la ligne de co-belligérance sera-t-elle considérée comme franchie? Le règlement de ce conflit ne peut se faire que par la diplomatie. La prolongation et l'éventuelle escalade de cette guerre aura pour seule conséquence de causer encore plus de morts, d'affaiblir davantage les deux pays et rendre encore plus longue la réconciliation des peuples. Si toutes les parties prenantes se tournaient dans les meilleurs délais vers la voie diplomatique et acceptaient de négocier un traité de paix et une cessation des combats immédiats, un pays comme la France pourrait jouer un rôle dans la résolution de ce conflit. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, dear colleague. Now the floor is for Mr. Thibault François from France.
Non, il a déjà parlé.
No, Basile Bolea, sorry. Basile Bolea from Moldova.
Да, большое спасибо. Уважаемые друзья, для начала позвольте мне от себя лично и от всего молдавского народа выразить слова соболезнования турецкому и сирийскому народу в связи с трагическими последствиями землетрясений, которые случились в этом месяце. Соболезнуем и скорбим. Позвольте мне сообщить делегатам сессии о той трагедии, которая может произойти в Республике Молдова. Говоря о происходящем, к сожалению, хочу констатировать, что наша страна, к сожалению, еще раз скатывается к установлению диктатуры и уничтожению плюрализма мнения. За время работы на площадках сессии в Бирмингеме в нашей стране власть закрыла 6 телевизионных каналов, делает нападки на лидеров оппозиции, возбуждая уголовные дела. Единственным правом, которое имеет депутат от оппозиции в Молдове, это право иметь как минимум 5-6 уголовных дел. Такими методами оппозиции рот не закроет. Власть внесла изменения в уголовное законодательство, внесли статью за сепаратизм, и это сделали таким образом, что теперь любой гражданин, проживающий в гагаузской автономии у нас в Молдавии или в Приднестровье, подпадает под эту статью о сепаратизме. К сожалению, молчание столь уважаемых представителей парламентской ассамблеи, как Верховный комиссар по правам человека, Верховный комиссар по правам национальных меньшинств, дает все больше смелости молдавским властям чинить беспредел. А теперь хотел бы сказать о трагедии, которая может развернуться в Приднестровье. Уважаемые друзья, 31 год в моей стране не слышно стрельбы. И это в том числе благодаря миротворческой миссии, которая работает до сих пор, а также работе структур ОБСЕ. Считаю, что конфликт на Днестре может быть решен исключительно дипломатическими методами. Левый берег Днестра не может существовать без правого берега, равно как и Кишинев не может существовать без Тирасполя. К сожалению, мы видим, что Молдову хотят втянуть в конфликт. Почему я пришел к этому выводу? Да все очень просто. В прошлой неделе вновь избранный премьер-министр Дарин Ричан объявил о том, что Приднестровье нужно демилитаризовывать. А на этой неделе все средства массовой информации говорят о том, что Украина концентрирует войска на приднестровском сегменте молдо-украинской границы. Целью является захват складов боеприпасов в селе Колбасно. Если это случится, то Молдова станет еще одной горячей точкой Восточной Европы. Мы этого не хотим. Соглашусь с высказыванием президента Республики Молдова. Я заканчиваю, господин председатель. Госпожи Майи Санду, что Молдова является молодым и хрупким государством. Нам еще многому нужно научиться. Считаю, что и ОБСЕ, и структуры парламентской ассамблеи могут быть теми партнерами, от которых можно многому научиться. Поэтому, уважаемая госпожа Сидерфельд, ее сейчас нету, и другие представители парламентской ассамблеи, Верховный комиссар по правам человека, Верховный комиссар по правам нацменьшинств, а также спецпредставитель по работе средств массовой информации. Ждем вас в нашей стране. Может быть, ваш визит остудит головы ястребов в моей стране. Спасибо за внимание.
Okay, thank you, dear colleague. Now the floor is for Mr. Joe Glio from Malta, and the next will be Mrs. Elena Stockenfeld from Sweden. Mr. Glio, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The war in Ukraine has created various difficulties, of course, and it has created very difficult situations. And in situations like this, sometimes we start to continue to question the relevance and the importance of an organization like the OSCE. However, I believe that it is precisely these difficulties which ought to unite us and which ought to make us stronger and which ought to be a catalyst for deeper soul searching in order for us to understand how this organization can indeed enhance its relevance. It is in this scenario that we can start to debate and see whether the OSCE should be heading towards taking additional roles insofar as the imposition of sanctions are concerned, in the sense that it could be an organization that could oversee these sanctions, that could coordinate these sanctions. We also need to start to consider, Mr. Chairman, that there are realities which are current and present. However, enhanced relevance also means that we have to keep in mind not only these scenarios, but we also have to keep high on the agenda the crises, the ongoing crises that still exist. The situation in Moldova, the situation in Armenia, the situation in Georgia, and the situation in Crimea. Another soul-searching exercise which we could do in order to enhance the relevance of this institution is perhaps to beef up conflict prevention in order to help the invaluable work which is being done by the unit already. Each and every one of us have a role, irrespective of the size of our countries, irrespective of the strength, economic or otherwise, of our countries. And in this way, yes, we would really and truly start to help to ensure that the enhanced relevance of the OSCE will indeed guarantee peace. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Next speaker is Ms. Helena Stockenfeld from the Swedish delegation. She will be followed by Mr. Mark Demesmaeker from the Belgium. Ms. Helena Stockenfeld, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, we have been naive for far too long. I belong to a generation that never thought that we would have to bear witness to the atrocities occurring in the Ukraine today. This is something that was said to belong in the history books. On top of that, I never thought I would be sitting in the same room as the aggressors on the day 1 year after the start of the invasion. We know why they are here. And as many have said before me, it is not for the purpose of dialogue. It is to spread their shameful propaganda and justify their war crimes. Their mere presence here in this hall is an abomination. There are no nuances here. This is black and white. This is right or wrong. Sweden held elections in this past fall, and during the last few weeks, I hosted Valeria, a young Ukrainian girl in her 20s. She was in Sweden to learn about our democracy, our political system, so that she could be a part of rebuilding and strengthening her country after the war. Last week, her uncle was killed on the front line, murdered by the invader. All she has left from him is a watch and a bloody talisman that reads freedom or death. When the war broke out, Valeria chose to stay in her home country to fight, like so many others. We, as representatives of the free world, must not stand idly by, but ramp up our support for Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, and their right to exist. Inaction is a coward's tool, and we know from history what happens when the good guys stand idly by. We must demand justice and hold Putin accountable. I stand with Valeria, and Sweden stands with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Ms. Helena Stockenfeld. Next speaker is Mr. Mark Demesmaeker from Belgium. He will be followed by Mr. Tahir Mikishvili from Azerbaijan. Mr. Mark Demesmaeker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I would like to respond first of all to the remarks of the delegation of the Russian Federation, because they keep spreading their propaganda with wrong figures and false accusations, accusations that Ukrainians killed people because of their ethnic background. The Kremlin is using this narrative to justify the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Let me point out the figures. Since 2014, 14,000 people died in Donbas. More than 10,000 of them were Ukrainian soldiers and Russian fighters. More than 3,400 civilians died of shelling from both sides. And that, by the way, includes the 298 souls from passengers from the passengers from jet MH17 that was downed by Russian forces. In the last 3 years, less than 100 civilians died, around half of them because of landmine accidents. There was no genocide in Donbas. No, Russia attacked because it thought it was strong enough and it would be able to achieve its goals rapidly to subjugate the Ukrainian nation. The debates here, Madam President, have shown overwhelmingly the support for the people of Ukraine and condemnation of Russian aggression, war crimes and crimes against humanity. That must be clear even to the delegation of the Russian Federation here in the room. To our Ukrainian colleagues who are not present physically, be assured of our continuous support. And to the Russian delegation, take this message home. You are isolated, no friends, and you cannot win this war. Your soldiers are dying with hundreds every day again, like soldiers did in Flanders fields more than 100 years ago where I live. Flanders fields in the Great War, senseless, in vain. There is one way out of this failed war, when you will find the way out of the territory of Ukraine, and let justice be done. And what about your leader? He is not a strong leader, because a real strong leader is a great leader who leads by his heart and who wants to make a positive impact on the world, not a destructive impact. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mr. Mark Demesmaeker. Next speaker is Mr. Tahir Mikishvili from Azerbaijan. He will be followed by Mr. Piotr Polak from Poland. Mr. Tahir Mikishvili, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Azerbaijan has invested a lot in development on transportation corridors in the region last decades. The volume of international freight by Azerbaijan as the part of the East-West corridor increased by 30% in 2022. Along with globalization, the location of Azerbaijan between Europe and Asia provides economic opportunities, particularly in the aftermath of recent geopolitical developments, raising the relevance and importance of the region due to strong transport and logistic potentials. Considering the Middle Corridor, the importance of the Zengezur Corridor, which Armenia refused to unblock, that can generate new transport opportunities with the expansion of the international cargo transportation receives special attentions. Along with this work was done, there are big threats for the Middle Corridor infrastructure also. Armenia has yet to fully withdraw its armed forces from the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan in line with the agreement. The illegal presence of the armed forces of Armenia aggravate the situation in the region and are big threats for Middle Corridor between East and West. Massive mine contamination by Armenia continues to be the major impediment for post-conflict rehabilitation and reconstructions. Armenia continued even after the end of the military activities and used Latin roads for its illegal purpose very actively. Dear colleagues, Azerbaijan remains ready to continue to engage in the meeting facilitated by the EU Council President, since contacts with this format thus far have proved to be helpful to bring positive closure. In this context, Azerbaijan expects the entire international community to contribute to this process and thus refrain from one-sided actions and statements that would complicate the already delicate situations. All of us need to unity and solidarity in front of very serious challenges. Only together we can defeat common threats. We believe that signing peace treaty by Armenia would eliminate serious threats for Middle Corridor only. Hope it will be happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tahir Mikishvili. Next speaker on my list, and it's the final speaker, is Mr. Piotr Polak. The floor from Poland. The floor is yours.
Dear President and colleagues, our position remains the same. It is absolutely necessary to continue our support for Ukraine on three levels. First, political, diplomatic, and technical support, including in the military domain. Second, maintaining sanctions pressure on Russia. Third, supporting Ukraine's other needs, especially energy and financial, from thinking about its post-war reconstruction. Russia is not aiming at real peace negotiations. The goals of its war have not changed either. The intentions is still to destroy the independence of Ukraine and an attempt to demolish the security system on this part of Europe. We do not agree with attempts to divide EU unity and against Russian moral historical blackmail and inherent propaganda accusing the West of a war in which Russia is reduced to the role of a victim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Piotr Polak. Unfortunately, we have to end sharply 12 o'clock because there is no interpretation after 12. But I would like to say, before I say thank you, that this have been, in my view, a fantastic winter meeting. I say this because
I can cut the microphone, I'll tell you something.
okay, I'm sorry, I need to get some information. I will be back in 1 second.
30 people.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, what I was going to say is that this winter meeting have been fantastic. It's totally in line with what we have said since 2014. It's what we said at the annual session in Birmingham. OSCE Parliamentary Assembly stands united behind Ukraine's right to its territory, Ukraine's right to sovereignty. And I must say thank you to all speakers here. And let's continue our work in support of peace and independence, sovereignty in Ukraine. And I hope that our Russian colleagues here have got the message that we as a Parliamentarian Assembly are supporting peace, and a peace that should occur immediately, not wait any longer. No more lives to sacrifice, no more injured people. Ukraine need peace and respect. Slava Ukraini. And now some more practical issues. I am sorry for those of your colleagues who haven't received the floor. But if you write down your remarks, send them to the Secretariat. They will be distributed so all colleagues can take care of them. I think this is very important. Otherwise, because I know you have prepared and I know that all of us would like to listen to them. What I also would like to say is thank you to the panelists for your excellent work, what you are doing and what you are doing to support Ukraine, to support the Assembly. Thank you. Continue the good work. I would also like to say thank you very much to the International Secretariat. If this meeting have gone smoothly, if it have gone well, it's because the International Secretariat have put a lot of efforts in it. Without their efforts and engagement, I can tell you, it wouldn't have been a meeting that are in this good shape. So thank you to Secretary General Montella. Thank you to all the staff of the International Secretariat. And then I would also like to mention, before we break up, that the standing committee meets in this room 2 o'clock. And during lunchtime, enjoy the lunch. I know that there is a lot of bilateral meetings and there is side events and there is other things going on. Please enjoy them. And one more thing, there is an event here in Hofburg that start 8 o'clock in the evening. It's nothing we have to do anything with, but it will, the area here around will close at 5 o'clock. So all of you, regardless if you are in the standing committee or not in the standing committee, we will close 4:30, 30 minutes earlier than advanced. I say it so nobody should get stuck here in Hofburg. Thank you very much.